At 37, Adrian Cole had built his life around one simple principle: anything important could be controlled if the terms were clear enough. Companies had contracts. Employees had performance reviews. Investments had risk assessments. Even friendships, in Adrian's experience, survived best when everyone understood what was expected of them. Love was different. That was precisely why Adrian had avoided it. On Monday morning, he stood behind the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office on the 46th floor of Cole Meridian Group's Manhattan headquarters, watching rain turn the city below into streaks of gray. Behind him, 12 executives sat around a polished walnut conference table. No one spoke. Adrian turned from the window to again. The chief financial officer swallowed. The board vote is scheduled for 6 weeks from Thursday. And if the controlling shares transfer as expected, your position remains secure. As expected? The CFO glanced toward Daniel Mercer. That was the mistake. Adrian noticed everything. His eyes moved immediately to Daniel, who sat at the far end of the table with a leather folder closed in front of him. Unlike everyone else in the room, Daniel did not look nervous. He looked entertained. Adrian disliked that considerably more. "Everyone out," Adrian said. Chairs moved almost simultaneously. Within 30 seconds, the conference room was empty except for Adrian and Daniel. Daniel waited until the doors closed. "That remains terrifying, by the way." "What?" "The way 12 highly successful adults evacuate a room because you use 3 syllables. Adrian returned to his chair. "Why did Harris look at you?" Daniel's amusement disappeared. He pushed the leather folder across the table. "Because your father apparently decided death was no reason to stop interfering with your life." Adrian stared at the folder. Richard Cole had been dead for 14 months. Adrian had mourned him privately, efficiently, and with the same discipline he brought to everything else. He had delivered the eulogy, handled the estate, comforted his mother, returned to work, and refused every suggestion that he take time away. Richard had built Cole Meridian from a regional property company into an international corporation. Adrian had spent most of his adult life preparing to inherit it. "What is this?" "A supplemental provision attached to the trust controlling your father's remaining voting shares. I've reviewed the trust. So had 3 estate attorneys." Daniel paused. Apparently, none of them reviewed this provision because it wasn't activated until 14 months after Richard's death. Adrian opened the folder. His expression barely changed as he read. Daniel watched him reach the second page, then the third, then return to the first. Adrian finally looked up. "No." Daniel leaned back. "That was also my initial legal interpretation. My father did not write this." "He did." "He wouldn't. He signed it in front of 2 witnesses and an estate attorney." Adrian looked back at the document. The language was formal and precise, but the meaning was absurdly personal. Richard Cole's remaining voting shares would transfer into Adrian's direct control only if Adrian satisfied a domestic stability provision before the deadline established by the trust. The relevant condition was painfully clear: marriage, not an engagement, not a public commitment. A legally recognized marriage maintained through the specified 12-month period. Adrian slowly placed the papers on the table. "My father attached corporate voting control to my marital status. Yes, that is irrational. Also, yes, it may be unenforceable. We've already examined that. And?" Daniel gave him a sympathetic smile. "I wouldn't start shopping for champagne yet." Adrian stood. He walked toward the windows again. There were moments when Daniel could almost see the machinery operating inside his friend's head. Shock lasted perhaps 30 seconds. Anger might receive another minute. Then Adrian began converting emotion into a problem. Problems could be solved. What happens if the condition isn't satisfied? The shares remain in the family trust and voting authority passes temporarily to the board-appointed trustee. For how long? 5 years. Adrian turned. "Absolutely not." "There he is." Victor Hale controls enough board support to influence the trustee appointment. Probably. He could dismantle the Heritage Division within months. Daniel's expression became more serious. That is one possibility. Adrian returned to the table. The Heritage Division was not Coal Meridian's most profitable operation. Several board members had complained about it for years. Historic buildings, restoration projects, protected properties sitting on extremely valuable land. Richard Cole had defended those projects while he was alive. Adrian had continued defending them partly because some were strategically useful. At least, that was what he told the board. If Hale gets those votes, he won't stop with the heritage properties, Adrian said. He'll restructure the company. Adrian. He's been waiting for this. Daniel studied him. Your first reaction to discovering that your deceased father wanted you to get married is concern about voting percentages. My personal feelings are irrelevant. That sentence may explain why your deceased father wanted you to get married. Adrian ignored him. He picked up the document again. 6 weeks? Until the voting deadline. Then the solution is obvious. Daniel became suspicious immediately. No. Adrian looked at him. I haven't said anything. You made the face. What face? The one you made before acquiring Palmer Industries. That acquisition increased annual revenue by 11%. The fact that you responded with a percentage proves my point. Adrian closed the folder. I need a wife. Daniel stared at him. Yes, Adrian. Traditionally, that is what marriage involves. For 12 months, silence. Daniel sat forward. No. A contractual arrangement. No. Mutually beneficial. Still no. Confidential. Especially no. Adrian began pacing slowly. There is nothing legally complicated about it. Daniel actually laughed. Adrian stopped. You're an attorney. Exactly. Which is why hearing a billionaire CEO say there is nothing legally complicated about arranging a temporary wife makes me want to retire. The marriage would be legitimate but romantic. The agreement surrounding it would establish expectations, even more romantic. Separate finances. Stop. You're making it beautiful. Independent residences if necessary. Daniel raised a hand. Please don't propose to anyone like this. I wouldn't be proposing in the conventional sense. That somehow made it worse. Adrian returned to his chair as if they were discussing a merger. We identify a suitable candidate, intelligent, discreet, financially independent enough that desperation isn't a concern. Daniel stared at him. Are you hiring a chief operating officer or getting married? Both require compatibility. No, they absolutely do not. Temperament matters. Public credibility matters. She needs to understand the arrangement and have no unrealistic expectations. Daniel opened his notebook. Adrian frowned. What are you doing? Documenting the exact moment this becomes evidence against me. Daniel, continue. This will be fascinating at trial. Adrian's expression hardened. Daniel sighed and put the pen down. They had known each other for nearly 20 years. Daniel was one of the few people alive who could irritate Adrian without consequences. Margaret Cole was another. Unfortunately, she chose that exact moment to call. Adrian's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. Mother. Daniel saw it. His smile returned. Perfect. Adrian declined the call. Daniel's eyebrows rose. You know she'll call again. The phone immediately vibrated. Adrian declined it again. 5 seconds later, Daniel's phone rang. He looked down. Margaret Cole. Daniel held the screen up. She adapts. Don't answer. Daniel answered. Good morning, Margaret. Adrian closed his eyes. Is my son with you? Daniel looked directly at Adrian. No. Adrian stared at him. Margaret was silent for a moment. Daniel, yes? You've been a terrible liar since you were 19. That feels unnecessarily personal. Put me on speaker. Daniel obeyed. Adrian? Yes, Mother. I knew it. What do you need? Lunch on Sunday. I have meetings. On Sunday? Yes. With whom? Adrian paused. Daniel covered his mouth. Margaret continued. Cancel them. Mother. Your father worked Sundays too. Look how well that turned out. The room went quiet. Margaret rarely used Richard's death as leverage. She didn't need to. Sunday, Adrian said. 1 o'clock? Fine. And don't wear that charcoal suit. Adrian glanced down at himself. How do you know what I'm wearing? You always wear charcoal when you're annoyed. Daniel turned away before Adrian could see him laughing. Margaret hung up. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Daniel looked at Adrian. Your mother can identify your emotional state through tailoring, and you're planning to convince her you suddenly fell in love? Adrian's jaw tightened. She doesn't need convincing. Oh, she absolutely does. The trust requires marriage, not maternal approval. Daniel leaned back. You've forgotten something. What? Margaret was married to the man who wrote this condition for 38 years. That stopped him. Daniel nodded toward the folder. If anyone suspects what Richard was trying to accomplish, it'll be her. Adrian looked down at his father's signature. For the first time that morning, the problem no longer seemed entirely mathematical. Still, he refused to treat it differently. Then we make the arrangement convincing. Daniel groaned. Of course we do. Adrian reached for another document. I want potential candidates by Wednesday. Daniel remained motionless. I'm serious. That is the problem. Wednesday. Daniel stood and collected the folder. At the door, he stopped. One question. Adrian looked up. Have you considered doing what your father probably intended? Which is, meeting someone, falling in love, getting married because you actually want to. Adrian stared at him as though Daniel had suggested resolving the board dispute through interpretive dance. I have 6 weeks. Daniel nodded slowly. Right. Ridiculous suggestion. He opened the door. Find someone appropriate, Adrian said. Daniel glanced back. What exactly counts as appropriate? Adrian answered without hesitation. Someone who understands rules. Daniel smiled. That answer would become extremely funny later. Neither man knew it yet, and neither knew that less than 48 hours later, Adrian would meet Claire Bennett, the first woman in years who would look at everything he could offer her, look directly back at him, and say no. Claire Bennett was standing 12 feet above the ground when Adrian Cole first asked her to become his wife. Not directly, not yet, but Adrian had already decided she was a possibility, which, in his mind, was nearly the same thing. He stood below the scaffolding inside the old Bellamy building, staring upward while fine white dust settled across the shoulders of his charcoal coat. Daniel stood beside him. You wore the charcoal suit. Adrian ignored him. You're annoyed, Daniel continued. I'm standing inside a construction site. Restoration site. There is dust. Yes, historic dust. Much more prestigious. Adrian looked up again. The Bellamy building had been constructed in 1912 and occupied half a block of increasingly valuable Manhattan real estate. Cole Meridian had acquired it years earlier, and Richard Cole had personally insisted that its original interior be preserved. Most executives saw cracked plaster, outdated wiring, and wasted square footage. Claire Bennett saw details worth saving. At that moment, she was carefully examining a damaged section of decorative molding near the ceiling. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose knot. She wore faded jeans, work boots, a cream sweater with the sleeves pushed to her elbows, and absolutely nothing suggesting she was about to become involved in the strangest negotiation of her life. Claire Bennett, Daniel said quietly, 32, architectural restoration consultant. Independent contractor, good reputation, no major financial problems, no tabloid history, no connection to your social circle. Adrian gave him a look. You investigated her? You told me to identify candidates. I meant professionally. You're planning a contractual marriage. There is no professionally normal version of this. Claire climbed down. Halfway to the floor, she noticed them. Her expression changed immediately. Not impressed. Not nervous. Annoyed. Interesting. She reached the bottom and brushed dust from her hands. Mr. Cole. Miss Bennett. Claire looked at his coat. You shouldn't wear that in here. Adrian glanced down. Why? Because that's lime plaster. She pointed at his shoulder. It doesn't care how much the coat costs. Daniel turned away. Adrian noticed. What? Nothing? Claire removed her gloves. If you're here about the west wall, the answer is still no. Adrian frowned. What west wall? The finance department wants it removed to create more commercial floor space. I haven't approved that. Good. Claire walked past him. Then don't. Adrian watched her go. Daniel leaned closer. Excellent chemistry. There is no chemistry. She insulted your coat within 30 seconds. That isn't chemistry. For you, it's practically foreplay. Adrian gave him a cold look. Daniel smiled. They followed Claire into a temporary workspace filled with architectural drawings, material samples, coffee cups, and several objects Adrian could not identify. Claire picked up a folder. So what does the CEO of Cole Meridian want badly enough to visit a restoration site personally? Adrian preferred direct questions. He also preferred direct answers. I have a proposition. Claire looked between him and Daniel. About the building? No. Another project? No. She waited. Adrian glanced toward two restoration workers nearby. Somewhere private. Claire's eyebrows rose. That sounds ominous. It isn't. Daniel coughed. Claire looked at him. Is it ominous? Daniel considered the question. Legally, Daniel? I'm just establishing definitions. Claire's expression became suspicious. 5 minutes later, the three of them were inside a small temporary meeting room. Claire sat across from Adrian. Daniel deliberately chose a chair slightly to the side. He wanted a good view. Adrian placed a folder on the table. Claire stared at it. What is that? A proposal. She didn't touch it. What kind? Marriage silence. Somewhere outside the room, a drill started. Claire blinked once. Then twice. Excuse me? Adrian folded his hands. I need to be legally married within 6 weeks. Daniel studied the ceiling. The arrangement would last 12 months. Claire looked at Daniel. He raised both hands. I advised against this. Repeatedly, Adrian added. Thank you. Claire returned her attention to Adrian. Are you asking me to marry you? Yes. You don't know me. I know enough. That might be the least romantic sentence ever spoken. Romance isn't relevant. Daniel made a small choking sound. Adrian ignored him. Claire leaned back. Please continue. At this point, curiosity has become stronger than common sense. Adrian explained the trust provision. Not everything? He didn't discuss family details or internal board politics, but he explained enough. He needed a legally valid marriage. The arrangement would last 1 year. Claire would be compensated generously. Her professional independence would remain untouched. There would be strict confidentiality, separate finances, clear boundaries, no expectations beyond agreed public appearances. When he finished, Claire was quiet. Adrian recognized that silence. People often became quiet when calculating numbers. He pushed the folder toward her. The proposed compensation is on page 4. Claire opened it. Daniel watched her face. Nothing happened. She turned one page, then another. Finally, she reached the figure. Her eyebrows rose. Adrian relaxed slightly. There it was. Everyone had a number. Claire closed the folder. No. Adrian's relaxation disappeared. Daniel looked down very quickly. What? No? Perhaps you didn't understand the compensation. I understood it. It would be paid independently of. I can read, Mr. Cole. Adrian stared at her. People negotiated with him. People countered. People asked for more. They did not simply say no. Is the amount insufficient? Claire almost smiled. You really think that's the problem? It is a reasonable question. No, it's an Adrian Cole question. Daniel's shoulders moved. Adrian turned. Are you laughing? No. Claire looked at Daniel. He is. I absolutely am. Adrian returned his attention to Claire. You haven't explained your objection. My objection is that you're trying to hire a wife. I am proposing a mutually beneficial legal arrangement. You put a salary on marriage. Compensation. That correction somehow made it worse. Daniel nodded. I said the same thing. You're my attorney. Which requires accuracy. Claire pushed the folder back. Why me? You meet the necessary criteria. Her eyes narrowed. Criteria? Independent, educated, discreet, professionally established. No obvious motivation to exploit the arrangement. Claire stared at him. You made a list. A profile. A wife specification. That isn't what I called it. What did you call it? Adrian hesitated. Daniel answered. Candidate suitability framework. Claire looked at him. Daniel shrugged. I didn't name it. For the first time, she laughed. It was brief, but genuine. Adrian found himself watching her longer than necessary. Then Claire stood. No. Adrian stood as well. You should take time to consider it. I have. 5 minutes isn't enough time. It was actually more than enough. You're rejecting a significant financial opportunity. Claire picked up her gloves. And you're assuming that because something has a large number attached to it, everyone should want it. Adrian's expression cooled. Money provides options. Absolutely, security. Yes, freedom. Sometimes. Then why refuse it? Claire looked directly at him. Because freedom also means being able to say no when someone assumes he can buy a year of your life. The words landed harder than Adrian expected. Daniel stopped smiling. Claire continued, softer now. You don't need a wife, Mr. Cole. What do I need? A loophole. She opened the door. You should probably ask your lawyers for one. Daniel raised a finger. We tried. Claire looked back. Try harder. Then she left. For several seconds, Adrian remained standing. Daniel waited. This is not amusing. I haven't said anything. You're thinking loudly. Daniel gathered the papers. I like her. That is irrelevant. I'm beginning to understand why your father wrote the clause. Adrian walked out. Claire was already back at work. She had climbed onto the scaffolding again as though a billionaire had not just offered her enough money to fundamentally change her life. Adrian disliked being dismissed. He disliked unexplained behavior even more. On the drive back to headquarters, he remained unusually quiet. Daniel finally looked up from his phone. You know there are other candidates. I know. Women who would probably accept. I know. We can move on. Adrian looked out the window. Why did she refuse? Daniel sighed. Because she doesn't want to marry you. That isn't an explanation. It is an exceptionally complete explanation. She didn't negotiate. Maybe she meant no. Adrian frowned. Everyone negotiates. Daniel smiled. Apparently not everyone. That evening, Claire sat at her mother's kitchen table in Queens with a cup of tea growing cold between her hands. She had told herself she wouldn't mention Adrian's proposal. Then Evelyn Bennett took one look at her daughter and asked what happened. Claire lasted approximately 4 minutes. He offered you what? Claire lowered her voice. Mom, I heard you. I'm giving the universe an opportunity to correct itself. Claire rubbed her forehead. 1 year. Completely contractual. Evelyn stared at her. And you said no? Obviously. Good. Claire looked up. Her mother was smiling. You hesitated before saying that. I did not. You did. I was processing the absurdity. Evelyn took a sip of tea. Is he handsome? Mom. That means yes. That means irrelevant. Also yes. Claire laughed despite herself. Then her phone vibrated. A message from a colleague appeared. You need to see this. Below it was a forwarded internal planning document. Claire opened the attachment. Her smile disappeared. Evelyn noticed. What is it? Claire enlarged the page. The document outlined a proposed restructuring of Cole Meridian's heritage portfolio. Several properties were listed. Bellamy Building, 2 historic warehouses, a railway terminal, and then Claire saw the final name. Hawthorne House Heritage Project. She stopped breathing for a moment. Evelyn leaned closer. What? Claire turned the phone toward her. Her mother's face changed. Hawthorne House was not simply another restoration project. Claire had spent part of her childhood there. Her father had spent nearly 15 years helping preserve it. Richard Cole had fought beside him when developers wanted the property demolished decades earlier. Claire remembered both men standing on the front steps, arguing over roof tiles and drainage while she sat nearby eating an ice cream. After her father's death, the project had become one of the few physical pieces of him that remained. What does this mean? Evelyn asked. Claire continued reading. The restructuring proposal came from a board faction led by Victor Hale. If voting control shifted away from Adrian, the Heritage Division would be reviewed immediately. Properties considered commercially inefficient could be sold, redeveloped, or demolished. Hawthorne House sat on land worth many times more than the building itself. Claire felt cold. They want the land. Evelyn said nothing. They've wanted it for years. And Adrian. Claire stared at his name in the document. As long as Adrian retained control, the existing preservation commitments remained protected. If he lost it, everything could change. Her mother slowly sat down. Richard wouldn't have allowed this. No. And your father certainly wouldn't. Claire closed her eyes. Suddenly Adrian's ridiculous proposal no longer seemed ridiculous. It was still arrogant. Still transactional. Still possibly the worst marriage proposal in recorded history. But it was connected to something larger than either of them. Evelyn watched her carefully. Claire. I know. No, you don't. Claire stood and walked toward the kitchen window. She remembered Richard Cole differently from the man newspapers described. Not the billionaire. Not the founder. She remembered the older man who had once arrived at Hawthorne House carrying sandwiches for the workers because everyone had forgotten lunch. She remembered him standing beside her father. She remembered what he had done for their family when everything had nearly fallen apart. And Adrian knew none of it. Perhaps that was the strangest part. He had sat across from her that afternoon believing he was offering Claire something. Money, security. Opportunity. He had no idea she might be the one holding something he needed. Claire looked back at her phone. One message could reopen the conversation. She didn't send it. Not yet. Across Manhattan, Adrian was probably already searching for another woman willing to accept his carefully calculated arrangement. Claire told herself that was exactly what he should do. Then she looked again at the words Hawthorne House Heritage Project. For the first time since leaving the Bellamy building, her certainty began to crack. And by morning, Claire Bennett would have a very different question. Not whether she was willing to become Adrian Cole's wife, but what rules he would have to accept before she agreed. At 8:07 the next morning, Daniel Mercer received a message from Claire Bennett. "Is Mr. Cole's ridiculous proposal still available?" Daniel stared at the screen. Then he smiled. He took a screenshot, walked out of his office, crossed the executive floor, and entered Adrian's office without knocking. Adrian looked up from his laptop. "You have a door." "I know. You're supposed to knock on it." "I also know." Daniel placed his phone on the desk. Adrian read the message. His expression did not change. Daniel waited. Still nothing. "That is the closest thing to excitement I've seen from you in years. I haven't reacted." "Exactly. For you, this is practically dancing." Adrian picked up his phone. "I'll call her." Daniel took it from his hand. "No." Adrian stared at him. "Give me my phone." "Not until we establish that you're capable of speaking to this woman without turning marriage into a quarterly earnings call. I spoke to her perfectly well yesterday. She rejected you in under 10 minutes. The conversation lasted 23 minutes. Daniel blinked. "You timed it?" "No. You just knew?" Adrian held out his hand. Daniel returned the phone. "Try to sound human." Adrian called. Claire answered after 3 rings. "Mr. Cole." "Miss Bennett." Daniel closed his eyes. "So much for human. I received your message. Technically, your lawyer received it. He's standing in my office." "Of course he is." Daniel leaned toward the phone. "Good morning, Claire." "Good morning, Daniel." Adrian moved the phone away. "This isn't a conference call." "It should be," Daniel said. "Given the subject matter." Claire laughed softly. Adrian ignored both of them. "You've reconsidered?" "I've reconsidered discussing it." "That isn't the same thing." "No." "When?" "Today. My office at 11. There was a pause. "Is that a question?" Adrian frowned. Daniel whispered, "She's training you." Adrian covered the phone. "Stop." Claire had apparently heard him. 11 works. I'll have Daniel prepare the agreement." "No." Adrian paused. "No? No agreement yet. We talk first." "About what?" "My conditions." Adrian leaned back. Yesterday, Claire had refused to negotiate. Today, she had conditions. That made considerably more sense to him. 11, he repeated. 11. She disconnected. Daniel smiled. "You look relieved." "I prefer negotiations." "Of course you do." Emotions were becoming dangerous. At exactly 11, Claire entered the executive conference room at Cole Meridian headquarters. The room occupied a corner of the 46th floor and had been designed for billion-dollar negotiations. A 20-foot walnut table dominated the space. 2 enormous screens covered one wall. Manhattan stretched beyond the windows. A tray of coffee, sparkling water, and pastries had been arranged at one end. Claire stopped in the doorway. "This feels excessive." Adrian stood. "For what?" "For discussing refrigerator shelves." Daniel nearly dropped his pen. Adrian looked confused. "We aren't discussing refrigerator shelves." "We will." Claire sat. Daniel immediately opened a fresh legal pad. "This is already better than yesterday." Adrian slid a draft agreement toward her. Claire didn't touch it. "Before anything else, there's something you need to understand." Her tone had changed. The humor was gone. Adrian noticed immediately. "What?" "Hawthorne House." For the first time, Adrian looked genuinely surprised. "What about it?" Claire studied him. "You know the board is considering restructuring the Heritage Division." "Yes." "And if you lose control, Victor Hale will likely push for asset liquidation." "Including Hawthorne?" "Possibly." "Not possibly." Claire opened her bag and placed the internal planning document on the table. Adrian read it. His expression hardened. "Where did you get this?" "Someone working on one of the restoration teams." "This is confidential." "So is the proposal where you asked me to marry you." "Apparently we're both having an unusual week." Daniel lowered his head to hide a smile. Adrian continued reading. Claire watched him. My father worked on Hawthorne House for almost 15 years. Adrian looked up. That was new information. He helped preserve it when developers first tried to tear it down. With my father? Claire hesitated. Yes. Adrian's eyes sharpened. You knew my father? I knew of him. It was technically true. Not completely true. Claire hated that distinction immediately. But this wasn't the moment to explain everything. Not yet. My father believed places carry memory, she continued. Richard apparently believed something similar. Hawthorne survived because both of them refused to let someone reduce its value to the price of the land underneath it. Adrian looked again at the proposal. Hale has wanted those properties for years. I know. So that's why you're here. Partly. You want me to preserve Hawthorne. I want whoever controls Coal Meridian to honor the existing preservation commitment. That can be included in the agreement. Claire's expression hardened. No. Adrian frowned. You just said, I don't want you to save it because I married you. Daniel stopped writing. Claire leaned forward. If we're doing this, Hawthorne stays separate. You protect it because it's the right business and historical decision, not because your temporary wife negotiated it into a marriage contract. Something changed in Adrian's expression. Very slightly. He had expected leverage. Claire had refused to use it. Then what do you want? Rules. That word caught his attention. Daniel noticed. Oh, he likes you again. Adrian ignored him. Claire pulled out a notebook. I made a list. Daniel looked delighted. Adrian looked impressed. Go ahead. First, separate finances. Agreed. I keep working. Obviously. No interference with my clients. Agreed. No career favors. Adrian paused. What qualifies as a career favor? Anything I didn't earn before becoming Mrs. Cole. Daniel wrote that down. Good clause. Daniel. I'm lawyering. Claire continued. My mother stays out of the press. Agreed. My family history stays private. Adrian studied her for a moment. Agreed. No personal compensation. This time Adrian stopped her. That's unreasonable. Claire blinked. You're objecting because I don't want your money? The arrangement requires a substantial commitment from you. I understand. You should be compensated. No. You're giving up 12 months. So are you. My financial position is different. That doesn't change the length of a year. Daniel looked from one to the other. This may be the first prenuptial negotiation in history where the billionaire is fighting to give away money. Adrian gave him a look. Claire smiled. No personal payment. Adrian considered it. Fine. Daniel wrote it down. Then Claire turned the page. Now we discuss living arrangements. Adrian sat straighter. Separate bedrooms. Obviously. Good. Private bathrooms. Fine. Shared kitchen. Adrian frowned. Why? Claire stared at him. Because kitchens are usually shared. I rarely use mine. Then this shouldn't be difficult. Fine. Food gets labeled. Adrian paused. What? Daniel's pen stopped. Claire remained completely serious. If something is labeled with a name, the other person doesn't eat it. Adrian stared at her. You're establishing ownership rights over groceries. Yes. We can maintain separate refrigerators. No. Why not? Because that's ridiculous. Daniel slowly raised his hand. I'm with Claire. Adrian looked at him. You're my attorney. And as your attorney, I'm advising you that 2 refrigerators may damage the credibility of your marriage. That isn't legal advice. It is now. Claire continued. No phone calls at the breakfast table unless there's an emergency. I work during breakfast. Not anymore. Adrian blinked. That isn't negotiable. Then neither am I. Silence. Daniel leaned back. This was better than theater. Adrian folded his arms. What constitutes an emergency? Fire. Medical crisis. Company collapse. What about a major acquisition? No. Hostile takeover? Claire considered it. Maybe. Daniel covered his mouth. Adrian looked genuinely offended. You're ranking corporate events. You asked. Claire made another note. Music. What about it? I listen to music in the morning. I don't. I know. How? You look like someone who considers silence productive. Daniel lost the battle and laughed. Adrian ignored him. What kind of music? Depends on the day. Volume? That isn't measurable. Claire stared at him. You want a decibel limit? If we're putting it in writing. Daniel put his pen down. No. Adrian looked at him. As counsel, I refuse to draft a marital music clause measured in decibels. Claire laughed. Even Adrian's mouth moved slightly. Daniel saw it. He pointed. There. That. What? You almost smiled. I did not. You absolutely did. Claire looked between them. Does he normally deny facial expressions? Constantly. Adrian changed the subject. Cleaning. Claire nodded. Good. Saturday rotation. I have staff. I know. Then why would either of us clean? Because we're adults. I employ adults specifically so I don't have to. Claire stared at him. Daniel whispered, Careful. What? You're losing her. Claire crossed her arms. One basic household responsibility. Adrian considered this as seriously as he would a multi-million-dollar contract. Dishwasher. Claire blinked. You'll load the dishwasher? Yes, properly? There is an improper way? Claire looked at Daniel. Daniel shook his head. He's going to learn so much. The negotiation continued for nearly 2 hours. Public appearances. Family events. Privacy. Sleeping arrangements. Travel. Media questions. Emergency procedures. Claire refused to pretend physical affection in private. Adrian clarified that he had never expected it. Claire insisted neither could bring romantic partners into the penthouse. Adrian agreed immediately. Daniel paused. That was fast. It's obvious. I'm just documenting enthusiasm. Adrian glared at him. By 1 o'clock, Daniel had produced 11 pages of notes. Only 4 involved matters normally found in legal agreements. The rest included groceries, music, guests, household boundaries, work schedules, and one surprisingly intense discussion about decorative pillows. Adrian opposed them. Claire liked them. Daniel refused to arbitrate. Finally, Claire leaned back. One more rule. Adrian waited. When the 12 months end, they end. The humor disappeared. No extensions because of business problems. No emotional pressure. No obligation. Adrian met her eyes. Agreed. If one of us changes our mind? About ending it? Yes. Adrian thought carefully. Then that person says so. And the other person is free to say no. Yes. Claire held his gaze. Good. Daniel watched them. Something about that final rule felt different. Neither Adrian nor Claire seemed to notice. Or perhaps both noticed and chose not to acknowledge it. Daniel closed his notebook. Congratulations. Claire looked at him. For what? You've successfully negotiated the least romantic engagement in American history. Adrian stood. We haven't signed anything. Fine. Preliminary congratulations. Claire gathered her papers. Adrian stopped her. Claire. She turned. You still haven't explained why you're willing to do this without compensation. Her expression changed. Only for a second. Maybe I think Hawthorne is worth protecting. That benefits the Heritage Division. Yes. Not you personally. It matters to me. Why? Claire looked toward the windows. Because her father had spent years there. Because Richard Cole had once protected more than a building. Because there were parts of her family's history that Adrian did not know. Parts she wasn't ready to tell him. Some things have value that doesn't show up on a balance sheet. Adrian said nothing. Claire smiled faintly. You'll learn. She walked toward the door. Daniel waited until she left. Then he turned to Adrian. She is going to destroy your entire operating system. Adrian picked up the draft agreement. She's organized. That is what you took from today? She understands boundaries. She forced you to agree to load a dishwasher. A minor concession. Daniel opened his notebook again. At the top of a blank page, he wrote, Adrian Cole, contract violation scorecard. Adrian noticed. What is that? Nothing. Daniel closed the notebook. Professional records. Destroy it. Attorney work product. You can't classify jokes as attorney work product. Watch me. For once, Adrian actually smiled. Only briefly. 3 days later, the final agreement was ready. Claire returned to Cole Meridian after business hours. No reporters. No family. No champagne. Just Adrian, Claire, Daniel, and 12 months reduced to 27 pages of legal language. Claire read every page. Adrian expected nothing less. She reached the final signature line. Claire Bennett. Beside it, Adrian Richard Cole. She looked at him. Still sure? Yes. That quickly? I don't make decisions I haven't considered. Claire smiled. That sentence is going to become funny eventually. Adrian didn't understand why. She signed. Then Adrian signed beneath his name. Daniel notarized the documents and closed the folder. Done. No one moved. For something that could change all three of their lives, the room felt strangely ordinary. Daniel finally broke the silence. So, he looked at Adrian. Have you told your mother? Adrian froze. Claire noticed. You haven't? I intended to. When? Daniel laughed. Margaret is having Sunday lunch tomorrow. Claire slowly looked at Adrian. You're planning to tell your mother tomorrow that you're marrying a woman she has never met? Yes. When is the wedding? Adrian checked his calendar. Friday. Claire stared at him. Next Friday? Yes. Daniel leaned back. Here we go. Claire closed her eyes. Then she laughed. Not delicately. Not politely. She laughed until she had to put one hand against the table. Adrian watched her, increasingly offended. What exactly is funny? Claire finally looked at him. You. I fail to see why. You've spent your entire life controlling everything, haven't you? I manage variables. Adrian, you're about to introduce a complete stranger to your mother and tell her you're marrying that stranger in 6 days. 5. Claire laughed again. Daniel added quietly, don't correct the countdown. It makes it worse. Adrian collected the signed agreement. Everything was settled. Every responsibility defined. Every risk anticipated. Every boundary documented. 27 pages of rules stood between Adrian Cole and uncertainty. He found that reassuring. Claire found it adorable in a way she would never admit. And Daniel? Daniel looked at the thick contract, then at the two people standing on opposite sides of the table. He already knew something neither of them did. 27 pages were nowhere near enough. Because the most dangerous part of their arrangement had never been written down. Neither Adrian nor Claire had included a rule about what would happen if pretending to love each other stopped feeling like pretending. Margaret Cole learned about her son's engagement over roasted chicken. Adrian had planned the conversation carefully. Claire knew this because he had spent the entire drive to his mother's townhouse explaining the order in which they would present the information. First, they had met through the Bellamy Restoration Project. True. Second, they had become acquainted privately. Technically true, depending on how generously one defined acquainted. Third, the relationship had developed quickly. Extremely true. Fourth, they had decided to marry. Also true. Adrian seemed pleased with the sequence. Claire stared at him from the passenger seat. You've turned our love story into meeting minutes. It prevents inconsistencies. It removes every trace of human emotion. That also prevents inconsistencies. Claire looked out the window. This is going to be a disaster. No, it isn't. You're introducing a fiancé your mother has never heard of. She'll be surprised. Adrian. Surprise is finding out someone changed dessert. This is discovering your emotionally unavailable son has secretly acquired a wife. I haven't acquired you. Claire looked at him. You literally had your attorney draft paperwork. That is different. How? Adrian considered it. Claire waited. He finally said, acquisition agreements are significantly longer. She laughed so suddenly that the driver glanced into the rear-view mirror. Adrian frowned. I was being factual. That is exactly why it's funny. Margaret Cole lived in a limestone townhouse on the Upper East Side that felt almost aggressively warm compared with Adrian's penthouse. Family photographs covered tables. Books filled shelves. Fresh flowers sat beside mismatched antique objects that had clearly been collected rather than professionally arranged. Claire noticed immediately that nothing looked staged. Adrian noticed her noticing. My mother refuses interior designers. I already like her. You haven't met her. I've seen enough. The front door opened before they could knock. Margaret Cole stood there wearing dark trousers, a silk blouse, and an expression of complete composure. Her eyes moved from Adrian to Claire, then to Adrian again. Interesting, Mother. Adrian. This is Claire Bennett. Margaret smiled. Of course it is. Claire blinked. Adrian frowned. What does that mean? Nothing. Margaret took Claire's hands warmly. Come inside? Adrian remained near the door. Mother, there's something we need to tell you. I assume so. She looked at Claire's left hand. No ring. Then at Adrian. Either you're secretly engaged or Claire has finally convinced you that historic plaster deserves a budget. Claire tried not to react. Adrian failed. How do you know who she is? Margaret walked toward the dining room. I read. That doesn't answer the question. It answers most questions. Claire followed, hiding a smile. Adrian followed Claire. He was beginning to understand why Daniel had been so enthusiastic about this lunch. They sat. Lunch began. Margaret asked Claire about restoration work. Claire asked Margaret about the house. Adrian attempted twice to introduce the subject. Both times, his mother redirected the conversation. Finally, he placed his fork down. Claire and I are getting married. Margaret calmly buttered a piece of bread. I see. Claire waited. Adrian waited. Nothing. That's all? Adrian asked. Margaret looked up. What would you prefer? Screaming? You don't seem surprised. I raised you. Very little surprises me anymore. That makes no sense. Neither does announcing a marriage 5 days before the ceremony. Claire's head turned sharply toward Adrian. You told her the date? I sent the details this morning. Margaret smiled at Claire. At 6:14. Claire nodded slowly. Of course he did. What? Nothing? Margaret's eyes moved between them. Claire recognized something dangerous in the older woman's expression. Amusement. Not suspicion. Amusement. That was somehow worse. So, Margaret said, how did Adrian propose? Adrian reached for his water. Claire answered. In a construction site. He stopped. Margaret's eyebrows rose. How romantic. There was scaffolding. Claire. And lime plaster. Claire. And Daniel. Margaret looked delighted. Daniel was there? He advised against it. Margaret laughed. Adrian stared at both women. This conversation is becoming inaccurate. Claire smiled sweetly. Which part? The implication that Daniel was present during a conventional proposal. Margaret tilted her head. Wasn't he? Adrian paused. Claire looked down at her plate. Margaret saw everything. Adrian, she said gently, feed Claire some of the potatoes. Silence. Claire looked up. What? Adrian looked equally confused. The potatoes are directly beside you. I can pass them. No. Margaret smiled. Feed her. Adrian stared at his mother. Why? Because you're in love. Claire almost inhaled her water. Adrian remained motionless. That isn't how adults normally distribute food. Margaret's expression became innocent. Really? Your father fed me constantly when we were newly married. Father also put ketchup on steak. Love requires sacrifice. Claire bit the inside of her cheek. Margaret pushed the dish toward Adrian. One bite. Mother. One. Adrian looked at Claire. Claire's eyes were sparkling with barely contained laughter. Don't, he warned. I didn't say anything. You're thinking something. Apparently I've learned from Daniel. Margaret handed Adrian a fork. Adrian looked at it as though it were a hostile instrument. Then he stabbed one roasted potato. Claire leaned slightly forward. Adrian stopped. This is absurd. Completely, Claire agreed. Margaret watched. Claire opened her mouth. Adrian fed her the potato. Margaret smiled. Claire chewed. Adrian put the fork down immediately. There. Margaret looked pleased. Very natural. Claire nearly choked. By the time lunch ended, Margaret had asked when they first kissed. Claire redirected. Where Adrian took Claire on their first date. Adrian redirected. What Claire's favorite flower was. Adrian answered roses. Claire hated roses. Margaret noticed. What Adrian ordered when he couldn't sleep. Claire guessed whiskey. It was tea. Margaret noticed that too. At the front door, she hugged Claire warmly. Then she whispered, "He's terrible at this." Claire froze. Margaret pulled away with a pleasant smile. Adrian approached. "What's terrible?" "Your posture." "My posture is fine." Margaret kissed his cheek. "Bring Claire for dinner next week." "We'll be traveling." "Then the week after." "We have." "Adrian." He stopped. Margaret smiled. "The week after." "Fine." Outside, Claire waited until the door closed. Then she turned to him. "Your mother knows." "She doesn't." "She absolutely knows." "Based on what evidence?" "She made you feed me a potato." "That proves nothing." "It proved plenty." 5 days later, they were married. The ceremony was small and private. Margaret attended. Daniel served as witness. Claire's mother stood beside her. No press was invited. By Monday morning, however, photographs were everywhere. Cole Meridian CEO secretly marries restoration expert. Who is Claire Bennett? Adrian Cole's surprise wedding. The company issued a short statement. Then Claire moved into Adrian's penthouse. That was when the real problems began. She arrived with 11 boxes. Adrian had expected perhaps 6. What is in those? Things. What kind of things? My things. That isn't specific. Claire pointed at the movers. Living room. Adrian stepped forward. Wait. Too late. The first box opened. Plants. Adrian stared. There were 6 of them. One was nearly 4 feet tall. No. Claire looked at him. No what? There are already plants. She glanced around. There were 2. Both identical. Both placed symmetrically near the windows. Claire looked horrified. Those aren't plants. They are objectively plants. Those are corporate lobby decorations. They're ficus trees. They look employed. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later and found Adrian standing in the center of the living room while Claire reorganized a shelf. What happened? Adrian pointed. She moved things. Daniel looked around. Call the police. She moved the sculpture. Which sculpture? Adrian pointed to an abstract bronze piece now sitting approximately 4 feet from its original position. Daniel stared at it, then at Adrian. You noticed that? Of course. Claire emerged carrying a stack of books. He noticed within 30 seconds. Daniel pulled out his phone. What are you doing? Starting the scorecard. This isn't a contract violation. No, this is baseline psychological data. By evening, the penthouse had changed. Not dramatically, but unmistakably. Books appeared. Claire's plants occupied the windows. A ceramic bowl sat on the kitchen counter. Fabric samples appeared beside architectural drawings. A pair of dusty work boots stood near the entrance. Adrian stared at them. Those can't stay there. They're shoes. They're covered in plaster. Historic plaster. Daniel, still visiting for reasons nobody understood, raised his glass. She got you. Adrian looked at him. Why are you still here? I want to see dinner. The first week of marriage became a collision between 2 incompatible operating systems. Adrian woke at 5:30. Claire woke at 6:45. Adrian drank coffee standing while reading financial reports. Claire sat at the table. Adrian liked silence. Claire liked music. On Wednesday morning, Nina Simone began playing through the kitchen speakers. Adrian appeared in the doorway. What is this? Music. I recognize the category. Claire spread jam across toast. It is 6:52. Yes. The agreement says music after 7. Claire looked at the clock. 8 minutes. 8 minutes is still a violation. She took a bite. You're going to report your wife? I could. To Daniel? Yes. Claire picked up her phone. She called Daniel. He answered sleepily. Someone better be dead. Adrian wants to report me. There was silence. Then Daniel laughed. Adrian took the phone. She violated Clause 14b. Daniel groaned. What did she do? Music. What time is it? 6:53. Adrian, yes? I'm billing you for this call. He hung up. Claire smiled. Justice. Their public life was more complicated. Cole Meridian's communications team arranged their first major appearance as a married couple at a museum benefit. The evening before, Margaret arrived unannounced. She carried index cards. Adrian stared at them. What are those? A test. No. Claire appeared from the kitchen. What kind of test? Margaret smiled. How well do you know your spouse? Claire stopped. Adrian immediately said, This is unnecessary. Perfect, Margaret replied. We'll start with you. Daniel arrived 10 minutes later. Adrian suspected his mother had called him. He was correct. Margaret sat Adrian and Claire on opposite ends of the sofa. Daniel acted as scorekeeper. Question 1, Margaret said. Claire's favorite breakfast. Adrian answered immediately. Greek yogurt, berries, black coffee. Claire stared at him. Wrong. Adrian frowned. You ate that yesterday. Because we were out of eggs. What is the answer? Eggs, sourdough toast, coffee with milk. Adrian looked offended. You drink black coffee at work. Because the office milk tastes strange. Daniel wrote a 0. Question 2. Adrian's favorite dessert. Claire thought. Chocolate cake. Adrian shook his head. I don't eat dessert. Margaret smiled. Lemon tart. Claire turned. You eat lemon tart? Occasionally. You told me you don't like sugar. I said excessive sugar. Daniel wrote another 0. This marriage is thriving. Question 3. Claire's least favorite food. Adrian confidently answered mushrooms. Claire stared at him. Olives. You eat mushrooms? Yes. You removed them from pasta Tuesday. Because they were undercooked. Daniel put his head down on the table. Margaret looked delighted. By question 10, they had scored 3 points. 2 were accidental. Margaret collected her cards. You have homework. Adrian stood. We don't need homework. You're appearing before 200 people tomorrow who will expect you to behave like newlyweds. We can behave convincingly. Margaret smiled. Then tell me Claire's middle name. Adrian froze. Claire turned slowly toward him. Daniel whispered, Oh, this is catastrophic. Adrian looked at Claire. Elizabeth? No. Anne? Claire's mouth fell open. You're guessing? Daniel was laughing too hard to write. Margaret stood. Tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock. Try not to look like colleagues attending an audit. Then she left. Daniel followed her toward the elevator. Before leaving, he looked back. What's her middle name? Claire answered. Rose. Adrian stared. You hate roses. My parents named me. The elevator doors closed on Daniel's laughter. That night, Adrian found Claire at the kitchen table surrounded by restoration sketches. He poured water. Rose. She looked up. What? Your middle name? Claire smiled. You're studying. I don't repeat mistakes. She closed her notebook. All right, your turn. My turn? Favorite movie? I don't have one. That is deeply concerning. I don't watch many movies. Favorite song? I don't have one. Favorite comfort food? I don't understand the category. Claire stared at him. You are much worse at being a person than expected. Adrian almost smiled. Almost. Claire noticed. Wait, what? That, what? You nearly smiled. No. You did. You're imagining things. She leaned back. Daniel was right. Daniel is rarely right. About you, he usually is. For the next hour, they asked questions. Some practical. Some ridiculous. Favorite season? Childhood nickname? Worst habit? First job? Most embarrassing school memory? Claire discovered Adrian hated bananas. Adrian discovered Claire couldn't swim well. Claire learned he secretly read history books before sleeping. Adrian learned she talked to her plants. I don't talk to them. You thanked one this morning. It grew a new leaf. That doesn't require gratitude. You've clearly never raised anything emotionally healthy. Adrian stared at her. Claire froze. Then his mouth curved. A real smile. Small, unexpected. Claire stopped breathing for half a second. It transformed him. The intimidating CEO disappeared. For one brief moment, Adrian looked younger. Warmer. Almost ordinary. Then the smile vanished. What? Nothing? You're staring. I've just never seen you do that. Do what? Look happy. Adrian became still. The humor faded. Neither knew what to say after that. Claire looked back at her notes. Adrian looked toward the windows. The penthouse no longer felt silent. There were papers on the table. Music speakers on the counter. A ridiculous number of plants near the glass. Claire's shoes by the door. Her coffee mug beside his. None of it belonged there. And yet, for the first time in years, Adrian noticed something uncomfortable. The apartment had always been immaculate. It had always been efficient. It had always been exactly the way he wanted it. But until Claire Bennett moved into it, Adrian had never realized how little it had felt like a home. He looked at her again. Claire was writing something on an index card. What is that? She held it up. Claire Rose Bennett hates olives. Adrian sighed. She placed it in front of him. Study. He picked it up. Then Claire wrote another. Adrian Cole secretly likes lemon tart. I do not secretly like it. You hid it from your wife. We've been married 6 days. Exactly. Betrayal already. Adrian shook his head. Claire smiled. Neither noticed how naturally the word wife had sounded. And neither noticed that somewhere between the refrigerator labels, Margaret's ridiculous tests, the morning music, and the plants invading Adrian's perfect windows, they had already begun breaking the most important rule of their arrangement. They were supposed to learn enough about each other to make the marriage believable. Instead, they were beginning to want to know more. Part 5. His father's name. 3 weeks into the marriage, Adrian Cole could answer 17 questions about his wife without hesitation. Claire's middle name was Rose. She hated olives but liked olive oil, which Adrian considered unnecessarily complicated. She drank coffee with milk at home and black coffee at work because, according to her, the milk in the Bellamy Building's temporary office tasted like it had lost the will to live. She preferred old jazz in the morning. She called her mother every Wednesday evening. She slept with the bedroom window slightly open even in cold weather. She became unusually quiet when she was angry. And whenever she was worried about something she did not want to discuss, she reorganized objects that were already organized. Adrian had learned that last detail without realizing he was learning it. Claire had learned things too. Adrian hated bananas. He owned 6 nearly identical charcoal suits and insisted they were different. He read history before bed. He never watched television while eating. He answered emails too quickly. He slept badly before important board meetings. And despite claiming not to like dessert, he had eaten half of the lemon tart Claire brought home the previous Friday. Daniel knew about that one. Unfortunately. You're at 23, Daniel announced one Monday morning. Adrian looked up from a quarterly report. 23 what? Violations. Daniel sat across from Adrian's desk, holding the notebook Adrian had repeatedly ordered him to destroy. I haven't violated the contract 23 times. Not according to the official scoring system. There is no official scoring system. Daniel opened the notebook. Violation 18. Purchased Claire's preferred coffee without being asked. That is a household supply. 19. Rescheduled a dinner meeting because she was working late. Logistics. 20. Attended an architectural preservation lecture. That was professionally relevant. You fell asleep during the section on 19th century mortar. I was tired. You stayed because Claire was speaking afterward. Adrian's eyes narrowed. Daniel continued. 21. Called her from Chicago. We share a residence. At 11:43 at night. I needed to ask whether she'd locked the terrace door. Daniel stared at him. You have automated locks. Adrian said nothing. 22. You remembered her mother's birthday. Basic courtesy. 23. Enough. Daniel closed the notebook. Do you know what I find fascinating? No. You've stopped asking whether these things violate the actual agreement. Because they don't. Exactly. Daniel smiled. Now you only argue about whether they count. Adrian returned to the report. Do you have work? Technically, this is work. It isn't. Your marriage is attached to $1 billion trust. Everything you do with Claire is potentially legal work. That is the most unethical billing philosophy I've ever heard. Daniel stood. Dinner at Margaret's Thursday. I know. She told me to remind you. I don't require reminders. She specifically said you do. Daniel reached the door. And Adrian. What? Claire hates olives. Adrian looked up. I know. Daniel smiled. See? Progress. Thursday evening, Margaret hosted dinner at her townhouse. It was supposed to be small. Margaret, Adrian, Claire, Daniel, Evelyn Bennett. Claire had been suspicious from the moment Margaret invited her mother. Adrian had been suspicious when his mother described the evening as casual. Margaret Cole did nothing casually. When they arrived, she opened the door herself. Her eyes moved immediately to their hands. Adrian and Claire were not holding each other. Margaret frowned. You're newlyweds. Adrian looked confused. Yes. Then why are you standing like you're waiting for an elevator? Claire bit her lip. Margaret took Claire's hand and placed it through Adrian's arm. There. Adrian looked down. Claire looked up. Your mother is terrifying. I heard that, Margaret said. It was a compliment. I know. Daniel arrived behind them. He saw Claire's arm linked with Adrian's. Without a word, he pulled out his notebook. Adrian pointed at him. No. Daniel put it away. For now. Dinner was warmer than Adrian expected. Evelyn and Margaret had apparently spoken twice since the wedding. This concerned both Adrian and Claire. How did you get my mother's number? Claire asked. Margaret looked innocent. You gave it to me. When? For the wedding. Claire turned to Adrian. This is how alliances begin. He nodded gravely. I've seen corporate takeovers with fewer warning signs. Daniel looked between them. Was that a joke? Adrian reached for his wine. Claire smiled. He's learning. Margaret looked delighted. After dinner, the two mothers disappeared into the sitting room. Daniel received a phone call and stepped outside. Claire offered to help carry coffee. Adrian followed her into the kitchen. You don't have to do that. Do what? Help. Claire looked at the tray. I'm carrying cups, Adrian. I'm not rebuilding the house. There are staff. There are always staff in your world. Yes. Sometimes people can just do things themselves. He picked up the coffee pot. Claire looked at him. What? Nothing? You're staring. You voluntarily picked something up. I load the dishwasher. Twice. 3 times. The 3rd time you loaded wine glasses upside down. That is how glasses are stored. Not in a dishwasher. He frowned. Then the design is flawed. Claire laughed. They carried the tray into the sitting room. That was when Adrian saw the photograph. It sat on a side table near Evelyn. Old. Slightly faded. 4 people stood in front of a stone building Adrian recognized immediately. Hawthorne House. One was Claire. Much younger. Perhaps 12. Another was Evelyn. The 3rd man had Claire's eyes. Her father. And the 4th. Adrian stopped walking. Claire saw his expression. The color left her face. Richard Cole stood beside Thomas Bennett. Adrian's father had one hand on Thomas's shoulder. Both men were laughing. Not posing formally. Not attending a corporate event. Laughing like friends. Adrian placed the coffee pot down. Where did you get that? The room became quiet. Evelyn looked at Claire. Claire didn't move. Margaret watched all of them. Adrian picked up the photograph. He turned it over. Handwriting covered the back. His father's handwriting. Hawthorne, 2006. Thomas finally admitted the original windows were worth saving. Claire still thinks we're both impossible. RC. Adrian read it twice. Then he looked at Claire. You knew him? Claire's voice was quiet. Yes. You told me you knew of him. I did know of him. That isn't what you implied. No. Evelyn stood. Adrian, please. His tone was controlled. Too controlled. Claire knew that tone. It meant he was angry. Adrian looked again at the photograph. My father knew your family. Yes. How well? Claire hesitated. That hesitation answered more than words could. Adrian's jaw tightened. Claire. Very well. The room seemed smaller. Margaret quietly stood. Perhaps we should. No. Adrian's eyes remained on Claire. How well? Claire took a breath. My father and Richard worked together on Hawthorne for years. I know that now. They became friends. Adrian stared at her. Friends? Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Claire looked at Evelyn. Her mother gave the smallest nod. Claire turned back. Because it wasn't relevant to the arrangement when you first approached me. That is obviously false. It wasn't why you chose me. But it was part of why you chose me. Claire said nothing. Adrian understood. Something in his expression changed. You knew about Hawthorne before you came back. Yes. You knew Hale would threaten it. Yes. And you knew my father cared about it. Yes. So when you returned to my office and agreed to marry me, you weren't simply reconsidering my offer. No. You were protecting the project. Partly. Adrian laughed once. There was no humor in it. Of course. Claire stepped toward him. Adrian, you should have told me. Yes. That stopped him. He had expected justification. Instead, Claire simply agreed. I should have. Then why didn't you? Evelyn spoke quietly. Because there is more. Claire closed her eyes. Mom. Adrian looked at Evelyn. What more? Claire's mother glanced toward Margaret. Margaret's expression had become solemn. Adrian noticed. You know too. Margaret didn't answer immediately. Mother. I knew Richard was close to Thomas. Did you know Claire? I met her twice when she was young. Adrian looked from his mother to Claire. Everyone seemed to know something except him. That feeling was unfamiliar. And intolerable. What happened between my father and your family? Claire looked at him. My father nearly lost everything. Adrian said nothing. It was after one of his restoration companies failed, Claire continued. A partner walked away. There were debts. Legal problems. My parents nearly lost their house. Evelyn's eyes lowered. Claire continued. My father wanted to abandon restoration work completely. And my father? Richard helped him. How? Claire hesitated. Adrian noticed again. Financially? Yes. How much? I don't know the exact amount. Evelyn did. Her expression made that clear. Adrian looked at her. How much? Enough, Evelyn said softly. For what? To keep our home, pay the company's remaining workers, settle several debts. Adrian's face hardened. So my father funded your family. Claire immediately shook her head. That's not how Thomas saw it. But that is what happened. No. Adrian looked at her. Claire's voice became firmer. Richard didn't hand my father charity. He created a private preservation trust and hired Thomas to oversee restoration work. My father worked for every dollar. But Richard created the opportunity. Yes. Which saved your family. Yes. Adrian looked down at the photograph. The pieces rearranged themselves. Claire's refusal. Her return. Her concern about Hawthorne. Her refusal to accept personal compensation. Her insistence that the Heritage Project remain outside the marriage agreement. It suddenly made perfect sense. And Adrian hated that. Not because Claire's motivations were selfish. Because they weren't. He had entered the arrangement believing he controlled every variable. He had chosen Claire. He had offered the money. He had provided the solution. He had believed she needed something he possessed. Instead, Claire had walked into his life carrying a debt of gratitude to his father and a determination to protect Richard's legacy. She had not needed rescuing. In some strange way, she had been helping him. The realization struck directly at the part of Adrian that had spent his entire adult life avoiding dependence. "So this marriage," he said slowly, "is repayment." Claire stared at him. "No. It certainly looks like it." "It isn't. You refused the money because you already believed your family owed mine." "No. You agreed because keeping me in control protects Hawthorne. That was part of it." "Then what would you call that?" "A choice. Made out of obligation." Claire's eyes narrowed. "Be careful." "Why?" "Because you're angry that I didn't tell you, and you have every right to be. But don't turn my father's life into a debt on your balance sheet, because that makes the situation easier for you to understand." Daniel returned at exactly the wrong moment. He stepped into the room, looked at Adrian, looked at Claire, looked at both mothers, then slowly backed toward the door. Margaret stopped him. "Stay." Daniel sighed. "Of course." Adrian placed the photograph on the table. "You should have told me before signing." "I know. Before moving into my home." "I know. Before letting me believe." He stopped. Claire waited. Believe what? Adrian didn't answer. That he was helping her. That he had the advantage. That he understood why she was there. That she had entered his world because of something he offered rather than something she had chosen to protect. Claire saw enough in his face. "You thought you were doing me a favor. I offered you financial security. I didn't ask for it." "I know." "Do you?" Her voice remained calm. "That made it worse. Because ever since we met, you've behaved as though you're the person carrying the risk. Your company, your inheritance, your reputation, your 12 months. They are substantial risks. So are mine. I never said they weren't. You didn't have to." Adrian's expression tightened. Claire stepped closer. "You keep assuming control means you're responsible for everything. Sometimes it just means you don't know how to let anyone stand beside you." Silence. Daniel stared at the floor. Margaret looked at her son. Evelyn looked at her daughter. Adrian's voice dropped. "This isn't about my personality. No, it's about the fact that I kept something important from you." "Exactly. And I was wrong." Claire held his gaze. "But you're not only angry because I lied." Adrian said nothing. "You're angry because you discovered you weren't the only person with a reason for entering this marriage." That hit. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Claire continued. "You wanted a woman who understood the rules." "Yes. You found one." Her eyes softened. "You just didn't expect her to have reasons of her own." The drive home was silent. Claire sat on one side of the car. Adrian sat on the other. Neither spoke. When they entered the penthouse, Claire removed her coat. Adrian walked toward his office. "Adrian." He stopped. Claire stood near the kitchen. The plants behind her cast soft shadows across the windows. "I'm sorry." He didn't turn. "For hiding it," she continued. "Not for caring about Hawthorne. Not for wanting to protect what our fathers built. But I should have told you the truth before signing." Adrian finally looked at her. "Is there anything else?" Claire froze. That answer came too slowly. Adrian noticed. His face changed. "What else?" "I don't know everything." "That wasn't my question." Claire looked away. Richard's financial arrangement had been complicated. Her mother had never explained all of it. Thomas had refused to discuss it while he was alive. Claire knew there had been documents. A trust. Private letters. Something Richard had insisted remain confidential. "I know Richard helped my family through a private arrangement," she said. "I don't know all the details. But your mother does." "Probably. And mine?" Claire thought about Margaret's expression. "Maybe." Adrian looked toward the city. For years, he had believed he understood his father. Demanding, brilliant. Distant to strategic. Richard had taught Adrian how to read contracts before most teenagers learned to file taxes. But the man in that photograph did not look distant. He looked happy. Adrian had almost forgotten that version of him existed. Claire approached the counter and placed something beside Adrian's keys. The photograph. Evelyn had given it to her before they left. "You should keep it." Adrian looked down. His father's handwriting remained on the back. He ran his thumb over the edge. "Why didn't he tell me?" Claire's anger disappeared. "I don't know." Adrian stared at the photograph. For the first time that evening, he didn't look like a CEO who had lost control of a negotiation. He looked like a son discovering that his father had lived an entire chapter of his life without him. Claire wanted to touch his arm. She almost did. Then she remembered the distance between them. And stopped. "I'll sleep at my mother's tonight if you want space." Adrian looked at her. The contract allowed it. Separate residences when necessary. No questions. No emotional obligation. It would have been the clean solution. The logical one. "No." Claire blinked. "No? Stay." One word. Nothing more. But Claire understood what it had cost him. She nodded. "All right." She went toward her bedroom. Adrian remained alone in the kitchen. A few minutes later, he opened Daniel's contact. He typed, "I need everything you can find about the private preservation trust between Richard Cole and Thomas Bennett." He stared at the message. Then added, "Do not involve Claire." Adrian sent it. Across the penthouse, Claire sat on the edge of her bed, unaware that the past she had tried to protect was about to become part of Adrian's investigation. And Adrian did not yet understand that the financial arrangement connecting their fathers was more than an old act of generosity. Hidden inside it was a piece of evidence that could eventually save his company. But using it would come at a price neither of them was prepared to pay. Part 6, The First Broken Rule. By Friday morning, Daniel Mercer had discovered two things. The first was that Richard Cole's private preservation trust had been structured with enough layers to make an ordinary attorney develop a drinking problem. The second was that Adrian had stopped pretending his interest in Claire was purely contractual. Daniel considered the second discovery considerably more entertaining. He entered Adrian's office carrying two folders. One was labeled Bennett/Cole Preservation Trust. The other was his notebook. Adrian looked at the notebook first. "No. I haven't said anything." "You brought it." "I bring legal records to meetings." "That is not a legal record." Daniel sat. "It documents behavioral patterns relevant to a legally significant marriage." "You invented the scoring system." "All scoring systems are invented." "Destroy it." Daniel opened it instead. 24. Adrian closed his eyes. "What now?" "You asked Claire to stay Wednesday night. She lives there. The contract explicitly permits her to stay elsewhere. That doesn't mean I have to encourage it." Daniel wrote something. 25. "What? You just defended 24 emotionally." "I did not." Daniel looked pleased. Adrian pointed at the other folder. "The trust." Daniel's expression changed. He pushed it across the desk. "Your father established the Preservation Trust in 2007. Thomas Bennett was one of its first project directors." "How much money?" "Initially, about $2 million. Adrian looked up. "That is significantly more than Claire implied." "She may not know." "What was it used for?" Payroll. Debt restructuring. Historic preservation work. Hawthorne House. Several smaller properties. So my father rescued Bennett's company. Partly. Partly? Daniel leaned forward. Thomas also saved your father from making a very expensive mistake. Adrian frowned. What mistake? Hawthorne. Daniel pulled out an old report. Richard originally planned to sell the land. Adrian stared at him. My father fought to preserve it. Eventually. Daniel tapped the report. Thomas convinced him. Adrian read the document. It contained Richard's signature. An early redevelopment recommendation. Demolition. Commercial construction. Then, 6 months later, everything changed. Richard withdrew the plan. The Preservation Trust appeared shortly afterward. Why? I don't know yet. Find out. I am. Daniel paused. There are sealed supporting documents. Sealed by whom? Richard. Adrian's jaw tightened. Can we access them? Possibly. How long? Adrian. How long? Several weeks, unless Margaret has copies. Adrian leaned back. His mother's name had become increasingly inconvenient. Daniel watched him. Ask her. No, why? Because she'll ask why. You're investigating your dead father's secret financial relationship with your wife's family. Adrian gave him a look. Daniel shrugged. Even I heard how that sounded. Claire noticed the change immediately. Adrian became polite. Not cold. That would have been easier. He still asked whether she would be home for dinner. Still made coffee if he reached the kitchen first. Still moved her restoration samples away from direct sunlight because she had once mentioned that certain pigments faded. But something had shifted. Questions remained behind his eyes. Claire knew he was investigating. She also knew Adrian well enough now to understand that asking him to stop would guarantee he worked faster. So she waited. That lasted 3 days. Then Adrian arrived at Hawthorne House. Unannounced. Wearing a navy suit worth more than Claire's first car. Claire stood on the front steps holding architectural drawings. She stared at him. Adrian looked around. Workers moved through the grounds carrying equipment. Dust covered almost everything. You're overdressed. I came from a meeting. Did the meeting know you were coming here? No. Does anyone know you're here? Daniel. Of course. A voice called from behind her. Claire. A man in work clothes approached carrying 2 coffees. He was tall, broad-shouldered, perhaps 34. Claire smiled. Adrian noticed. He also noticed the coffee. And the fact that the man handed one to Claire without asking how she took it. Perfect, Claire said. Thank you. Saved you from the machine inside. That thing isn't coffee. I've been saying that for months. They laughed. Adrian remained on the steps. Claire finally remembered him. Adrian, this is Noah Grant, structural engineer. Noah offered his hand. Good to meet you. Adrian shook it. Noah. Noah looked at Claire. So this is the husband. Adrian's eyes moved toward Claire. The husband? Claire immediately understood. Noah knew me before the wedding. Obviously. Something in Adrian's tone made Noah glance between them. Claire almost smiled. Noah pointed toward the building. I'll check the East Foundation. Thanks. He left. Adrian watched him go. Claire took a sip of coffee. What? Nothing? You're staring. At the building? No, you were staring at Noah. I was not. You absolutely were. I was assessing him. Claire's eyebrows rose. As a structural engineer? Yes. You've never seen his work. Then I was assessing whether he appeared competent. Claire bit her lip. Adrian noticed. What? Nothing? You're doing the thing. What thing? The expression you make when you're trying not to laugh. Claire failed. You're jealous. Adrian's face became perfectly still. No. You are. I have no reason to be. That's not a denial. It was exactly a denial. A voice came from behind him. It wasn't convincing. Adrian turned. Daniel stood near the gate. Adrian stared at him. Why are you here? You left your security detail confused. I don't need supervision. No, but this seemed too entertaining to miss. Daniel looked toward Noah. Then at Claire. Then at Adrian. He pulled out the notebook. 26. Adrian's eyes narrowed. If you write anything. Daniel wrote. Claire laughed. Adrian looked between them. This is absurd. Daniel read aloud. 26. CEO visits restoration site without scheduled corporate purpose after learning attractive male engineer regularly works beside contractual wife. I came to inspect Hawthorne. You've had 11 months to inspect Hawthorne. I've been busy. Apparently less busy today. Claire crossed her arms. Why did you actually come? Adrian looked at her. There were several possible answers. He had wanted to see Hawthorne after reading his father's documents. He wanted to understand what Thomas Bennett had fought to protect. He wanted to understand why Claire cared so deeply about the place. And yes, when Claire had casually mentioned Noah during breakfast, Adrian had disliked the familiarity with which she said his name. But that detail was irrelevant. I wanted to see the project. Claire studied him. Then nodded. Fine. She handed him a hard hat. Adrian stared at it. Put it on. Is that necessary? Yes. Daniel immediately raised his phone. Adrian pointed at him. No photographs. I haven't done anything. Your face has. Claire handed Daniel another hard hat. For the next hour, she led them through Hawthorne. Adrian gradually stopped noticing the dust. Claire showed him the original staircase Thomas had fought to preserve. The damaged murals. The 19th century stonework. The room where Claire remembered sitting as a child while her father argued with Richard about window frames. He won that argument, she said. My father? No, mine. Adrian looked offended on Richard's behalf. How do you know? Because the original windows are still here. Daniel smiled. I liked Thomas already. Claire's expression softened. He would have liked you. Then she looked at Adrian. And he would have found you exhausting. Adrian stared at her. Daniel laughed. Definitely liked him. The humor disappeared 2 days later. At 6:12 a.m., Cole Meridian's communications director called Adrian. By 6:30, every major financial news outlet had received documents suggesting Adrian had entered his marriage specifically to manipulate the terms of Richard Cole's trust. The documents were incomplete. But they were real. Someone inside the company had leaked part of the estate provision. By 7, reporters were outside Cole Meridian headquarters. By 8, Claire's name was trending alongside phrases she refused to read twice. Paid wife? CEO's secret marriage deal. WHO really benefits from Cole wedding? Adrian stood in his office with Daniel and the communications team. This came from Hale. We can't prove it, Daniel said. We don't need to. Legally, we do. Adrian looked at the television. A commentator was discussing Claire's career. That changed something. Turn it off. The communications director did. We issue a statement, Adrian said. Daniel shook his head. Not yet. They're dragging Claire into it. I know. She isn't part of the board dispute. Publicly, she's your wife. That makes her part of the story. Adrian's jaw tightened. Then remove her from it. How? I don't care. Daniel looked at him carefully. There it was again. Not the company. Not the trust. Claire. At 9:15, the elevator opened. Claire walked into the executive floor. Adrian stared at her. "What are you doing here?" She carried 2 coffees. "One is yours. You shouldn't have come." "Good morning to you too." Claire. She handed him the coffee. "Black, no sugar." "I know how I take coffee." "Apparently you're angry enough to forget manners." Daniel turned away. Adrian lowered his voice. "There are reporters downstairs. I saw them. They may follow you." "They already did." Adrian's expression changed. "What?" "From Hawthorne. Security should have. I handled it." "How?" "I walked inside." "That isn't handling it." "It worked." Adrian looked furious. Claire understood. Not at her. For her. That realization softened something inside her. "I came because you have a board meeting at 10. I know. And because Hale wants you distracted. I know. And because if I disappear today, it looks like we're hiding something." Adrian said nothing. Claire stepped closer. "So we're not hiding. This isn't your problem." "Yes, it is." "No. You don't get to decide that alone." His eyes met hers. The room around them seemed quieter. Claire continued. "You asked me to stand beside you publicly for 12 months. That was before this. This is exactly what publicly means." Adrian looked away. "I won't have your reputation destroyed for my company." Claire's voice softened. "My reputation belongs to me." He looked back. "I decide what I'm willing to risk." That stopped him. Daniel watched from across the room. For once, he did not reach for the notebook. Claire attended the board meeting. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. When Adrian entered the room with Claire beside him, Hale's expression changed. The message was simple. They weren't running. Afterward, Adrian's communications team released photographs from the wedding and a short statement confirming that the marriage was private but genuine. No discussion of the trust. No defense. No attack. By afternoon, the story had begun shifting. Then Claire did something nobody expected. She returned to Hawthorne. Reporters followed. When asked whether she had married Adrian for money, Claire stopped. Adrian, watching the live feed from his office, stood immediately. Daniel looked at him. "She knows what she's doing." Claire faced the cameras. "I had a career before marrying Adrian Cole, and I still have one." Questions exploded. She continued calmly. "My work matters to me. My family matters to me. My marriage is private, that's all I'm going to say." Then she put on her hard hat and walked inside. Daniel looked at Adrian. "She's good." Adrian said nothing. But his expression said enough. That evening, Claire returned to the penthouse after 9. The lights were low. Adrian was in the kitchen. She stopped. 2 plates sat on the table. "You cooked?" "No. Thank God. I ordered." Claire smiled tiredly. "Smart." She sat. For several minutes, neither discussed the day. Then Adrian spoke. "You didn't have to do that." "I know. You could have stayed away." "I know. The contract doesn't require you to defend me." Claire looked at him. "I wasn't defending you." He frowned. "I was defending myself." Adrian nodded slowly. "And maybe," she added, "I was standing beside you." Something shifted. Adrian looked down at his plate. Claire studied him. "You're still angry about my father." "Yes, fair. And you're still hiding something." "I told you everything I know." "That isn't the same as everything there is." "No." Adrian looked at her. "Daniel is investigating." "I assumed." "You're not angry?" "I would be if you weren't Adrian." "What does that mean?" "You investigate restaurant reviews before ordering lunch." "That is sensible." You once compared 3 brands of dish soap. They had different concentrations. Claire smiled. There he was. Serious enough to become funny without understanding why. Then Adrian said something unexpected. Thank you. Claire stopped. He rarely thanked people for anything emotional. For what? For today. You're welcome. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Different. Adrian looked at her. There was dust near Claire's hairline. A faint mark of plaster on her sleeve. She looked exhausted. And somehow, sitting inside his immaculate kitchen, she looked more natural there than anything he had chosen for the apartment himself. Claire noticed him staring. What? Nothing? That wasn't nothing. Adrian reached across the table. His fingers brushed near her temple. Claire froze. He removed a tiny piece of plaster from her hair. Neither moved. His hand remained near her face for 1 second too long. Maybe 2. Claire's breathing changed. Adrian noticed. So did she. The contract suddenly seemed very far away. Adrian lowered his hand. Claire looked at him. You just broke a rule. His voice was quieter. Which one? I don't know. Then it isn't a rule. Claire smiled faintly. You'd make a terrible lawyer. I have Daniel. Unfortunately. Adrian almost smiled. Neither mentioned what had nearly happened. Neither needed to. At 10:43 that night, Daniel received a message. It was from Adrian. The media issue is contained. Cancel tomorrow's crisis meeting. Daniel replied. Good. Anything else happen? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then, no. Daniel stared at the message. He opened his notebook. 27. Lied to legal counsel about wife-related incident. He thought for a moment. Then added. 28. Almost certainly falling for her. Daniel smiled and closed the notebook. Across the city, Adrian stood alone beside the penthouse windows while Claire's morning playlist played softly from the kitchen speakers. It was after 10 at night. He could have turned it off. He didn't. And for the first time since signing the marriage agreement, Adrian understood something he had never considered when drafting 27 pages of rules. The danger was not that Claire might break them. The danger was that Adrian was beginning to hope she would. By the 4th month of Adrian and Claire's marriage, Daniel Mercer had stopped counting minor violations. There were too many. Adrian now knew which restoration days left Claire too tired to cook, so dinner mysteriously arrived before she came home. Claire had learned that Adrian became impossible to speak to when he skipped lunch, so protein bars began appearing in his briefcase. Adrian complained about her plants but watered them when she traveled. Claire complained about his 6 charcoal suits but had somehow learned which one he wore when he needed confidence. None of those actions appeared anywhere in the contract. Daniel had therefore created a new category. Domestic behavior of questionable contractual relevance. Adrian discovered the heading during a meeting. He stared at it. You need a hobby. Daniel took the notebook back. This is my hobby. That is deeply concerning. You're one to talk. You alphabetized your spice cabinet. It was inefficient. You didn't own spices before Claire. Adrian paused. Daniel smiled. Exactly. The media scandal had faded. Victor Hale had not. Inside Cole Meridian, the battle over Richard's voting shares was becoming more aggressive. Hale had quietly built support among board members who believed the Heritage Division was sentimental, expensive, and commercially outdated. Hawthorne House was still protected. For now. But Adrian knew the situation would change quickly if he lost control. Daniel's investigation into Richard's Preservation Trust had produced almost nothing new. The sealed records remained sealed. Several original documents were missing from the corporate archive. And Margaret continued answering questions about Richard with the precision of a witness under oath. "She knows something," Adrian said. Daniel looked up from his laptop. "Obviously. Then why won't she tell me?" "Maybe because you're asking like a prosecutor. I'm asking direct questions. You asked your mother whether she had retained legally relevant documents associated with your father's confidential financial activity. That is a direct question. Most sons would say, 'Mom, did Dad ever leave any old papers around?' That is vague. That is human." Adrian frowned. Daniel leaned back. "You know who might have better luck?" "No, Claire." "No, why?" "I told you not to involve her." Daniel stared at him. "Adrian, she's married to you, connected to the trust, and currently living inside the mystery. I don't want her dragged further into my father's financial affairs." Daniel's expression softened slightly. 4 months earlier, Adrian would have said the information was strategically sensitive. Now he was protecting Claire. "Interesting. You could ask what she wants." "I know what she wants." Daniel smiled. "That sentence has ended well for you every single time." Claire was unaware of that conversation. On Saturday morning, she was standing in Margaret's attic wearing old jeans and a sweater, surrounded by 40 years of Richard Cole's life. Margaret had called 2 days earlier. "Not Adrian. Claire. I need help sorting some things," she'd said. Claire had agreed before understanding the scale of the request. Boxes filled half the attic. Books, photographs, architectural plans, old business records, letters, objects Richard had apparently refused to throw away. Claire picked up an obsolete hotel key card. Why did he keep this? Margaret glanced over. Paris. That explains nothing. Our 20th anniversary. Claire smiled. Okay, keep. Margaret laughed. You're worse than I am. Sentimental objects are different. From what? Clutter. Margaret pointed toward 3 boxes Claire had already marked keep. Apparently everything becomes sentimental if you're given enough time. Claire looked around. Adrian would throw away 80% of this. 90. He'd create categories. He'd create a spreadsheet. Claire smiled. With retention dates. Margaret laughed. For nearly an hour, they worked comfortably. Claire had grown unexpectedly close to Adrian's mother. Margaret never treated her like an employee. Never asked about the contract. Never directly questioned the marriage. That made Claire more suspicious, not less. Eventually, Claire sat beside a box labeled simply, Richard, Personal. She opened it. Inside were photographs. Many of Adrian as a child. Adrian at 5 holding a toy airplane. Adrian at 8 sitting on Richard's shoulders. Adrian at perhaps 13, scowling at a camera beside a fishing lake. Claire held that one up. He was adorable. Margaret looked. He would hate that description. I'll use it frequently. He also cried when that fish got away. Claire's eyes widened. Really? Don't tell him. Margaret, that information is too valuable. Margaret smiled. Then her expression changed. Claire was holding another photograph. Richard Cole. Thomas Bennett. Hawthorne House. Both men stood beside a partially restored stone wall. Claire's smile faded. I've never seen this one. Margaret sat beside her. Your father hated having his photograph taken. He did. Richard didn't. Claire looked at the image. He never told Adrian about any of this. No, why? Margaret was silent. Claire waited. Finally, Margaret said, Richard and Adrian loved each other very much. Claire looked at her. But? They understood each other badly. Margaret folded her hands. Richard believed pressure created strength. Adrian learned that lesson too well. Claire thought about the man who reviewed restaurant menus before making reservations. Who scheduled personal phone calls? Who treated uncertainty as something to eliminate? Richard regretted that? Toward the end, Margaret looked toward the attic window. He began to realize Adrian wasn't simply disciplined, he was alone. Claire felt something tighten in her chest. Did he tell Adrian? No. Why not? Pride. Margaret smiled sadly. Coal men have historically suffered from a tragic inability to say simple things. Claire laughed softly. That explains a lot. They can negotiate international deals but become confused by the sentence "I miss you." That explains even more. Margaret looked at Claire. You've changed him. Claire immediately shook her head. No. You have. This marriage is. She stopped. Margaret waited. Claire realized how close she had come. Complicated. Margaret smiled. I know. Claire looked sharply at her. Margaret stood. I'll make tea. Margaret, tea. She disappeared downstairs. Claire stared after her. That woman knew. She absolutely knew. Claire returned to the box. Near the bottom, beneath several old property reports, she found a stack of envelopes tied with faded string. Most were addressed to Margaret. One was addressed to Thomas Bennett. Claire froze. Her father's name. She touched the envelope. It had never been mailed. There was no stamp. Only Richard's handwriting. Thomas, personal. Claire should have stopped. It wasn't hers. Then she noticed another envelope beneath it. This one had a name she knew even better. Adrian. Her heartbeat changed. The envelope was sealed. Underneath it was a smaller document folder. On the front. To be opened if Adrian fulfills the 12-month provision. Claire stared. For several seconds, she didn't move. Then Margaret's voice came from behind her. You found it. Claire turned. Margaret stood at the attic entrance holding 2 cups of tea. You knew this was here. I suspected. Is this why you asked me to help? Margaret didn't answer. Claire stood. You could have given it to Adrian. No, why? Because he would have treated it like evidence. Claire almost laughed. He still will. Eventually. Margaret placed the tea down. But Richard didn't write that for the CEO of Coal Meridian. She looked at the envelope. He wrote it for his son. Claire's expression softened. I can't open it. No. Neither can you. No. So what do we do? Margaret picked up the folder. The instruction says the documents can be reviewed by the spouse if necessary to protect the intent of the trust. Claire stared at her. That's unusually specific. My husband knew his son. Claire slowly opened the folder. Inside was a copy of the trust provision. Several handwritten notes. And one letter marked. Explanation of intent. Claire unfolded it. She read slowly. The first paragraph concerned the company. The second concerned Adrian. By the third, Claire had stopped breathing normally. Richard had written about his son with an honesty Claire had never expected. Adrian was brilliant. Responsible. Loyal. But somewhere along the way, Richard believed he had taught his son the wrong lesson. That safety came from control. That vulnerability created weakness. That relationships were reliable only when obligations were clearly defined. Claire continued reading. Richard had watched Adrian's relationships become increasingly transactional. Employees respected him. Competitors feared him. Women dated him. But almost nobody truly knew him. Richard feared Adrian would inherit Coal Meridian and spend the rest of his life protecting the company while gradually removing every unpredictable human connection from his world. The marriage condition was not about marriage. It had never been about producing an heir. It had never been about public image. Richard had deliberately created a requirement Adrian could not satisfy alone. Claire sat down. Margaret watched her. He knew Adrian would find a loophole, Claire whispered. Margaret smiled sadly. He expected it. Claire looked again at the letter. Richard had even predicted Adrian might arrange a marriage rather than fall in love naturally. One handwritten line made Claire laugh despite everything. If Adrian attempts to solve matrimony as though acquiring a subsidiary, Daniel is instructed to discourage him, although I have limited confidence Daniel will succeed. Claire covered her mouth. Margaret laughed. He knew both of them very well. Claire kept reading. Then the humor disappeared. Richard had included one final explanation. The 12-month period mattered because a transaction could begin through obligation. But maintaining a shared life for a year required something else. Patience. Compromise. Trust. The willingness to be inconvenienced. The acceptance that another person's needs might matter even when they provided no strategic advantage. Richard didn't require Adrian to remain married after the year. He only wanted his son to experience what it meant to share a life long enough for control to become impossible. Claire lowered the letter. This is insane. Margaret nodded. Somewhat manipulative. Definitely. Possibly emotionally irresponsible. Almost certainly. Claire looked at her. Margaret smiled. He was still my husband. I don't have to defend every idea he had. Claire laughed. Then her expression softened again. He loved Adrian. More than Adrian understood. Then why couldn't he just tell him? Margaret looked toward the photographs. Because Richard learned too late that saying what mattered was harder than arranging circumstances around it. That evening, Claire returned to the penthouse carrying a copy of the letter. Adrian was in the kitchen. Cooking. Claire stopped. There was a pan on the stove. Actual food inside it. She stared. What happened? Adrian looked over. What? Why are you cooking? I'm capable of cooking. Are you? Yes. What is it? Pasta. Claire approached cautiously. You're holding the spoon like a weapon. That is irrelevant. She looked inside the pan. Did you put olives in it? Adrian stared at her. No. Claire smiled. He remembered. Something about that hurt more after reading Richard's letter. Adrian noticed the folder in her hand. What is that? The humor disappeared. Claire placed it on the counter. I spent the day with your mother. That sounds dangerous. It was. What did she do? Showed me photographs of you at 13. Adrian froze. Claire smiled. You had braces. Give me the photographs. Never, Claire. You also apparently cried over a fish. Adrian stared at her in horror. My mother is no longer authorized to communicate with you. Claire laughed. Then she touched the folder. I found something else. Adrian saw her expression. He turned off the stove. What? A letter from your father. Silence. About the trust? Yes. Adrian reached for it. Claire stopped him. Before you read it, there's something you need to know. His eyes met hers. The marriage clause wasn't what you thought. Adrian's expression hardened. What does that mean? Your father wasn't trying to force you to settle down. Then what was he doing? Claire looked at him. He was trying to make you lose control. Adrian said nothing. She handed him the letter. He read standing beside the kitchen counter. Claire watched his face. At first, nothing changed. Then his jaw tightened. His eyes slowed. Once, he stopped reading entirely. Then continued. When he reached the handwritten line about acquiring a subsidiary, Adrian closed his eyes. Claire couldn't help herself. He predicted you perfectly. This isn't funny. It's a little funny. He manipulated the trust. Yes. He manipulated me. Yes. He involved Daniel. Apparently with low expectations. Adrian looked offended. Claire smiled. Then Adrian reached the final page. The room changed. Richard's last lines were simple. Not legal. Not strategic. A father admitting something to his son too late. He wrote that Adrian had spent his life proving he could carry everything alone. Richard's final hope was that someday Adrian would understand he didn't have to. Adrian lowered the page. Claire said nothing. Several seconds passed. Then Adrian walked toward the windows. Claire let him. Eventually, he spoke. He could have told me. Yes. I would have listened. Claire didn't answer. Adrian turned. You don't believe that? I didn't know you then. But? Claire looked at him gently. The man I met 4 months ago tried to hire a wife. Adrian stared at her. Claire raised one shoulder. Richard may have had a point. Against his will, Adrian laughed. One quiet breath of laughter. Then the sadness returned. I spent 15 years trying to become the man he wanted me to be. Claire stepped closer. Maybe that's the problem. What? Maybe you became the man you thought he wanted. Adrian looked at her. For once, he had no response. Claire stood beside him. Not touching. Just there. Eventually, Adrian's hand moved. His fingers found hers. Claire froze. He didn't look down. Neither did she. There was no audience. No reporter. No mother testing them. No contractual reason for contact. Claire slowly closed her fingers around his. Adrian let her. Neither mentioned the rule. Neither pulled away. The following morning, Daniel arrived for a meeting. He found Adrian drinking coffee. Claire stood beside him. Their hands were separate. Daniel looked at both of them. Then at the folder containing Richard's letter. Then back at Adrian. So. Adrian narrowed his eyes. What? Daniel slowly opened his notebook. 31. Claire laughed. Adrian looked genuinely irritated. You don't even know what happened. No. Daniel wrote something. But your face does. Adrian reached for the notebook. Daniel pulled it away. Claire walked toward the elevator. Have fun. Adrian watched her leave. Daniel noticed that too. He added another mark. 32. Daniel. Yes? Get out. Daniel smiled. Absolutely. He gathered his papers. At the door, he stopped. By the way, there was something else in Richard's trust. Adrian looked up. Daniel's expression was no longer amused. What? I finally got access to one of the restricted financial schedules. Adrian became still. And? Daniel closed the door again. The payments to Thomas Bennett weren't structured the way we thought. What does that mean? It means the Preservation Trust may not have been charity, employment, or even a conventional investment. Daniel placed a document on Adrian's desk. And if I'm reading this correctly, your father used his personal assets to guarantee something much larger. Adrian looked down. A familiar name appeared beside Richard's. Thomas Bennett. Below it was another name. Hawthorne Preservation Holdings. Daniel's voice became quiet. This could change the board fight. Adrian looked up. How? Daniel hesitated. Because if we use it correctly, you may not need the marriage provision to keep control of Cole Meridian. For months, that was exactly what Adrian had wanted. A legal solution. A clean solution. A way out. But Adrian's first thought was not about the company. It was about Claire. And for the first time, the possibility of no longer needing the marriage frightened him more than losing control of Cole Meridian ever had. Part 8. The choice his father left. 4 months earlier, Adrian Cole would have considered Daniel's discovery a victory. A legal path around the marriage provision. A way to secure control of Coal Meridian without waiting for the 12-month condition. A solution independent of Claire. It was exactly what Adrian had asked Daniel to find. Now he stared at the document on his desk and felt something dangerously close to disappointment. Daniel noticed. Naturally. You look terrible. I look fine. You just discovered a potential way to keep control of a multi-billion-dollar company. I understand what happened. And you look like someone canceled Christmas. I don't celebrate Christmas enthusiastically. Daniel sighed. Of course you don't. Adrian picked up the document. Explain. Daniel sat across from him. Hawthorne Preservation Holdings was created in 2007. Richard personally guaranteed the financing. I can read. I'm aware. It's one of your more irritating qualities. Daniel. Right. Daniel opened another folder. Thomas Bennett wasn't simply an employee of your father's preservation trust. He held a minority beneficial interest in Hawthorne Preservation Holdings. Adrian frowned. How? Richard transferred it to him. For what consideration? That is where things become complicated. Daniel pushed a second document across the desk. It was an old valuation report. Adrian scanned the first page. Then the second. His expression changed. This valuation is wrong. Yes. Not slightly wrong. No. The land was undervalued by almost 60%. Correct. Who prepared it? An outside firm hired by Coal Meridian. Adrian kept reading. The date was familiar. 2006. The year Richard had nearly approved Hawthorne's demolition. Daniel leaned forward. Thomas discovered the valuation problem. Adrian looked up. He stopped my father from selling. More than that. Daniel pulled out another document. According to this, Thomas identified a conflict involving one of Richard's senior executives. Someone was attempting to push the property through a shell buyer at an artificially low price. Adrian stared. Fraud. Potentially. Who? Dead now. Name. Charles Vale. Adrian recognized it. Former executive vice president. Richard had dismissed him abruptly in 2007. No public explanation had ever been given. And Victor Hale? Adrian asked. Daniel's expression tightened. Vale was his mentor. The room became silent. Adrian looked back at the documents. Suddenly, Hawthorne was no longer simply a sentimental preservation project. It was evidence of an old corporate scandal. One Richard had apparently buried. Why would my father hide this? To protect the company. That isn't enough. And Thomas? Adrian looked up. Daniel continued. Thomas obtained internal records while working as an outside contractor. There were questions about how he accessed them. Illegally? Possibly. Adrian leaned back. If this became public, Richard's reputation takes a hit for covering up internal fraud. Thomas could be portrayed as someone who improperly obtained confidential corporate material. Hawthorne's preservation becomes connected to the scandal. And Claire? Daniel was silent. Adrian's eyes hardened. Daniel. She becomes the daughter of the man who financially benefited after exposing the scheme. That isn't what happened. I know. The press won't. No. Adrian stood. He walked toward the windows. How does this help us? Daniel hesitated. The beneficial interest Richard transferred to Thomas was never properly extinguished. Adrian turned. What? When Thomas died, his interest passed through his estate. To Evelyn. Initially. Adrian already understood. His expression changed. Daniel nodded. Then to Claire. Silence. Claire Bennett unknowingly held a beneficial interest connected to one of Coal Meridian's most valuable historic assets. How much? On paper, not enough to matter financially. And strategically? A lot. Daniel opened another document. The original governance agreement contains voting protections tied to Hawthorne Preservation Holdings. Combined with the trust structure, Claire's interest gives us grounds to challenge the board's authority to liquidate several heritage assets. And Hale's restructuring plan? Potentially blocked. Adrian's mind moved quickly. If Hale attempted to remove me while simultaneously liquidating protected assets, we could argue conflict of interest. The trustee appointment could be challenged. Yes. And Richard's remaining shares? Frozen during litigation. Adrian looked at him. For how long? Long enough. There it was. The solution. Elegant. Legal. Strategically devastating. Everything Adrian would normally want. What do we have to disclose? Daniel didn't answer. Adrian already knew. All of it. Yes. Thomas. Yes. The fraudulent valuation. Yes. My father's cover-up. Yes. The financial arrangement. Yes. Claire's beneficial interest. Yes. Adrian's jaw tightened. Daniel spoke carefully. If we file, the documents become part of the court record. Public. Eventually. Adrian looked toward the city. He imagined the headlines immediately. CEO's wife secretly holds stake in family assets. Cole marriage connected to decades-old financial deal. Claire Bennett's family received millions after corporate scandal. The truth would not matter. Not quickly enough. Claire had already been called a paid wife once. This would make it worse. When do we need to decide? 48 hours. Claire knew something was wrong before Adrian said a word. He came home at 8:20 that evening. No phone in his hand. No laptop bag. No immediate complaint about the restoration samples on the dining table. Claire looked up from her drawings. That bad? Adrian removed his coat. What? Whatever happened? Nothing happened. You forgot to complain about my mess. Adrian looked at the table. There were stone samples, 3 pencils, tracing paper, photographs, and 1 mug. It's excessive. Too late. Your first reaction was silence. Adrian walked toward the kitchen. Claire followed. Daniel found something. He stopped. Claire knew immediately. About my father. Yes. She waited. Adrian opened the refrigerator. Then closed it without taking anything. Claire crossed her arms. You're stress opening appliances. I am not. You just opened the refrigerator for no reason. I considered water. The water is filtered at the sink. Adrian looked at her. Claire softened. Tell me. He didn't. Adrian. It may protect Hawthorne. Claire became still. And block Hale. Her eyes widened. That's good. Yes. And help you keep control? Potentially. Claire smiled. For half a second, Adrian hated how relieved she looked. Then she noticed his expression. What is the cost? There it was. Claire understood him too well now. Adrian leaned against the counter. The evidence involves your father's relationship with mine. Her smile disappeared. What evidence? He explained. The undervalued property. Charles Vale. Thomas discovering the records. Richard covering up the scandal. The Preservation Trust. The beneficial interest. Claire listened without interrupting. When Adrian finished, she stared at him. My father owned part of Hawthorne? Technically. He never told me. He may not have understood the long-term structure. My mother? Possibly. Claire sat. For several moments, she said nothing. Then she asked the question Adrian had been waiting for. What happens if you use it? The board action can be challenged. That isn't what I asked. Adrian looked at her. Claire's voice was quiet. What happens to my father? The documents become public. And Richard? His role becomes public too. And me? Adrian didn't answer. Claire nodded. Right. You'll be accused of hiding a financial interest. I didn't know it existed. I know. Will that matter? Eventually. But not at first. No. Claire looked down. Her father's reputation had never mattered to millions of people. It mattered to her. Thomas Bennett had died believing he had protected Hawthorne. He had not been perfect. He had made mistakes. He had been stubborn, proud, occasionally reckless. But he had not been corrupt. Claire looked up. Can we win without it? Daniel's voice answered from the doorway. Maybe. Both turned. Claire frowned. Does everyone in this family enter homes without knocking? Daniel held up a keycard. Adrian gave me access years ago. Claire looked at Adrian. That ends tomorrow. Agreed. Daniel looked offended. I've been coming here for 9 years. And now someone actually lives here, Claire said. Daniel paused. Fair. For one brief second, the tension broke. Then Daniel placed a folder on the counter. We have another option. Adrian straightened. What? Do nothing. Claire blinked. Daniel continued. We don't file the Hawthorne evidence. We let the trustee vote proceed. And Hale wins, Adrian said. Probably. I lose controlling authority. Yes. For 5 years. Yes. Claire looked at Adrian. And Hawthorne? Daniel's expression was careful. We can protect Hawthorne separately through preservation law. It will be harder, slower, expensive. But possible? Yes. Adrian understood immediately. And the rest of the heritage portfolio? No guarantee. Silence. Claire looked between them. So that's the choice. Daniel nodded. Use the evidence. Adrian probably keeps control and can protect the entire division. Or keep it private, protect Hawthorne through other means, and Adrian likely loses the controlling seat. Claire turned toward Adrian. No. He frowned. What? You're not making that decision tonight. I already know. No. Adrian's expression hardened. Claire. You've spent your whole life making decisions under pressure because you think hesitation is weakness. This isn't psychological analysis. No. It's exactly what your father wrote about. That stopped him. Daniel quietly moved toward the living room. Neither noticed. Claire stepped closer. If you protect me tonight because you feel guilty, you'll resent it someday. I wouldn't. You don't know that. I know myself. Claire's expression softened. That is becoming increasingly debatable. Despite himself, Adrian almost smiled. Claire continued. You don't get to turn me into another obligation. You aren't. Then make the decision as though I weren't your wife. Adrian stared at her. How? Ask yourself what kind of man you want to be when nobody is watching. The next morning, Margaret requested breakfast. Not invited. Requested. Adrian and Claire arrived at her townhouse at 8. Daniel was already there. Adrian looked at him. Why? Daniel lifted his coffee. Your mother summoned counsel. Margaret entered carrying toast. No business discussion before eating. Adrian looked at the clock. We have 41 hours. You have 10 minutes for eggs. Mother. Sit. He sat. Claire tried not to smile. Margaret placed eggs in front of Adrian. Then she looked at Claire. You know. Claire nodded. Most of it. Margaret sighed. I hoped Richard would take that history to his grave. He nearly did, Adrian said. Margaret sat across from him. Your father made mistakes. Covering up fraud is more than a mistake. Yes. Adrian hadn't expected agreement. Margaret continued. But Richard believed exposing everything would destroy Thomas too. Why? Because Thomas obtained the records from an office he had no authorization to enter. Claire's expression changed. My father broke in? Margaret almost smiled. He would have called it opening an unlocked door. Claire closed her eyes. That sounds like him. Daniel coughed. Even Adrian's mouth moved. Margaret continued. Richard paid off no one. Thomas accepted no bribe. They created the trust because both men wanted Hawthorne protected permanently. Then why transfer an interest to Thomas? Adrian asked. Because Richard trusted him. Margaret looked at Claire. And because your father refused charity. Claire smiled sadly. That sounded like Thomas too. Adrian looked down at his plate. The story had changed again. Richard had not rescued Thomas. Thomas had not simply protected Richard. They had protected each other. Two stubborn men who refused to describe friendship as dependence. Adrian almost laughed at the irony. Claire noticed. What? Nothing. Margaret smiled. He finally understands where he gets it. 36 hours later, Cole Meridian's board assembled. Victor Hale sat opposite Adrian. Daniel sat behind him. The evidence remained inside Daniel's briefcase. Unused. Hale spoke for nearly 20 minutes. Declining margins. Unnecessary preservation expenses. Leadership instability. Questions surrounding Adrian's marriage. Then came the motion. Temporary transfer of controlling authority. Daniel leaned toward Adrian. This is the last chance. Adrian looked at the briefcase. One filing. That was all. The evidence could freeze the vote. Destroy Hale's plan. Preserve Adrian's control. Then Adrian remembered Claire standing in his kitchen. Make the decision as though I weren't your wife. He thought about Richard. About Thomas. About Hawthorne. About the photograph of two men laughing outside a building neither had been willing to surrender. And Adrian understood something. Using their private history as ammunition would save the company Richard built. But it would betray the reason Richard had protected that history in the first place. Adrian looked at Daniel. No. Daniel studied him. Certain? Yes. Daniel closed the briefcase. The vote proceeded. Adrian lost. He returned home after midnight. The penthouse was dark except for one lamp. Claire was asleep on the sofa. Architectural drawings covered the coffee table. A blanket had slipped onto the floor. Adrian stood there for a long moment. Then Claire opened her eyes. What time is it? Late. She sat up. The vote? Adrian removed his jacket. I lost. Claire became still. You didn't use it. No. Why? Adrian looked at her. He could have said because of Richard. Because of Thomas. Because the evidence was private. Because the media would distort it. All were true. But none was the entire truth. I wouldn't win that way. Claire's eyes filled slightly. She looked down before he could see too much. You may lose the CEO seat. Yes. Hale may dismantle half the Heritage Division. I know. You spent your entire adult life preparing to control that company. Yes. Claire looked back at him. And you just let it go? No. Adrian sat across from her. I chose what I wasn't willing to destroy to keep it. The words settled between them. Claire's breathing changed. For months, she had watched Adrian become different in small ways. Cooking pasta. Watering plants. Remembering olives. Laughing. Showing up at Hawthorne in an absurdly expensive suit because he was jealous of Noah. Those changes had been easy to tease him about. This was different. This had cost him something. Something enormous. Claire reached across the space between them. Her hand touched his. Adrian looked down. Then back at her. Neither moved away. You know what Daniel will do if he sees this, Claire whispered. Add another number. He's probably past 40. His methodology lacks integrity. Claire laughed softly. Adrian smiled. Then the laughter disappeared. Their faces were closer than either had realized. Claire could see the exhaustion in his eyes. Adrian could see the emotion she was trying to hide. For one suspended second, neither remembered the contract. Adrian lifted his hand toward her face. This time, there was no plaster to remove. Claire knew that. So did he. His fingers touched her cheek. Claire closed her eyes. And then Adrian kissed her. Not for cameras. Not because Margaret was watching. Not because the agreement required a performance. There was no audience at all. Claire kissed him back. When they finally separated, Adrian remained close. Claire opened her eyes. That definitely broke a rule. Adrian's forehead nearly touched hers. Which one? She smiled. I'll ask Daniel. Don't. Claire laughed. Adrian kissed her again. And somewhere across Manhattan, completely unaware of what had just happened, Daniel Mercer was probably about to add another line to his ridiculous notebook. But the most important rule had already been broken. The marriage was no longer pretending to become real. It had become real. And that created a new problem neither Adrian nor Claire was ready to face. 8 months still remained on the contract. And for the first time, the ending date no longer felt like protection. It felt like a threat. 8 months later, Daniel Mercer placed his notebook in the center of Adrian Cole's desk. The cover was worn. Several pages had been folded. One corner had a coffee stain Claire insisted was Adrian's fault. Across the front, in Daniel's handwriting, were the words, Adrian Cole, Contract Violation Scorecard. Adrian looked at it. Then at Daniel. What is this? The final report. There is no final report. There is now. Daniel sat down. Your contract expires tomorrow at midnight. Adrian's expression did not change. Daniel had known him too long to be fooled. You remembered, Adrian said. I'm your attorney. You remember nothing unless it's billable. This is extremely billable. Adrian looked back at his computer. Daniel opened the notebook. Would you like the final score? No. 147. Adrian looked up. That is impossible. Daniel smiled. Would you like examples? No. Excellent. Daniel turned several pages. Unscheduled physical contact. Daniel. Repeated overnight stays in the same bedroom. Stop. Unauthorized romantic gifts. They weren't unauthorized. Which is not the defense you think it is. Adrian leaned back. Are you finished? Not remotely. Daniel continued. Personal travel unrelated to public marital obligations. Hand-holding without witnesses. Cooking together. One weekend in Vermont that had absolutely no corporate purpose. The Vermont trip was private. Exactly. You're invading my privacy. You told me about it. I told you because you asked where I was. And you answered honestly. Growth. Adrian stared at him. Daniel turned to the final page. Then there are approximately 42 violations involving kissing. Adrian stood. Meeting over. Daniel laughed. Adrian walked toward the windows. The humor lasted only a moment. Tomorrow. Midnight. For 12 months, that date had existed in the contract like an emergency exit. Now it was almost here. Daniel closed the notebook. Have you asked her? No. Why? Adrian didn't answer. Daniel's expression became serious. Adrian. She knows how I feel. That isn't what I asked. We've discussed the future. Have you? Yes. What did she say? Adrian looked toward the city. That we would discuss it when the agreement ended. Daniel sighed. That sounds suspiciously like not discussing it. She doesn't want the decision influenced by the contract. The contract ends tomorrow. I know. Then tell her you want her to stay. Adrian remained silent. Daniel understood. You're afraid she'll say no. Adrian turned. I am not afraid. Daniel stared at him. You voluntarily surrendered controlling authority over a multi-billion-dollar company, but asking your wife whether she still wants to be your wife is where courage becomes complicated? This isn't funny. No. Daniel stood. That's why I'm not joking. The consequences of Adrian's board decision had unfolded exactly as expected. Victor Hale's faction gained temporary control. Adrian remained CEO for several months while the transition was negotiated, but his authority narrowed steadily. Then, 6 weeks before the marriage contract expired, Adrian made the decision himself. He stepped down as group CEO. Financial reporters called it shocking. Some analysts called it defeat. Hale's supporters called it inevitable. Adrian called it practical. Daniel called that nonsense. Adrian accepted leadership of Coal Meridian's Northeast Development and Preservation Division, a smaller operation with a fraction of his previous authority. Ironically, it included Hawthorne House. The property survived. Several other heritage projects survived too after Adrian negotiated independent preservation protections before leaving the top position. He could not save everything. That bothered him. But it no longer destroyed him. Richard's private documents remained private. Thomas Bennett's name never became tabloid material. Claire's beneficial interest in Hawthorne was quietly transferred into a non-profit preservation structure with her consent. And Victor Hale never received the scandal he had hoped to weaponize. Adrian lost power. But not himself. For the first time, he understood the difference. The penthouse had changed even more. Claire's plants had multiplied. There were now 14. Adrian knew because he had counted them. Claire discovered this on a Sunday morning. You counted my plants? I needed to know how many required watering. You could look. That is inefficient. She smiled. Do you know their names? They don't have names. Claire stared at him. Walter. What? She pointed. Walter. To the plant? Yes. That is ridiculous. That's Eleanor. Another plant. Frank. Another. Adrian looked horrified. You named all of them? Months ago. Why didn't I know this? You never asked. Adrian stared at Walter. Then Eleanor. Then Frank. Claire walked away laughing. The next morning, she caught him checking Walter's soil. She said nothing. Some victories deserved privacy. On the evening before the contract expired, Margaret invited everyone to dinner. Claire immediately suspected a trap. She was correct. When she and Adrian arrived, there were candles, flowers, champagne. Daniel was already there. So was Evelyn. Claire looked around. "What is this?" Margaret smiled. "Dinner. This looks like an anniversary." "It is." Adrian frowned. "Technically tomorrow." Margaret stared at her son. "Thank you, calendar." Daniel raised his glass. 1 year since the least romantic courtship in Manhattan history. Claire laughed. Adrian removed his coat. "The marriage has been legally valid regardless of your opinion." Daniel looked at Claire. "He still talks like this." "Less often." "Marginal improvement." Margaret kissed Claire's cheek. Then she hugged Adrian. "For longer than usual." Adrian noticed. "What?" "Nothing. Mother." "Sit." Dinner began. For once, Margaret didn't test them. No questions about favorite foods. No forced affection. No traps. That made Claire nervous. After dessert, Margaret brought out a small box. She placed it between Adrian and Claire. Adrian looked suspicious. "What is that?" "A wedding gift." "A year late?" "I wanted to make sure you deserved it." Claire laughed. Adrian looked offended. Margaret opened the box. Inside was an old brass key. Claire recognized it immediately. Hawthorne. Margaret nodded. Richard kept the original west entrance key. Claire picked it up carefully. "He had this?" "For years." Margaret looked at Adrian. "Your father would have been unbearable about how all of this turned out." Adrian almost smiled. "He'd say it was exactly his plan. Which is why I would refuse to give him the satisfaction." Daniel raised his glass. "To Richard." Evelyn lifted hers. "To Thomas." Claire looked at Adrian. He raised his glass last. "To both stubborn men." They drank. Then Daniel reached into his jacket. "No." Adrian knew immediately. Daniel pulled out the notebook. Claire laughed. Margaret looked delighted. "What is that?" "Evidence." Adrian stood. "Give me that." Daniel moved away. "For 12 months, I have documented Adrian's repeated violations of his own marital rules." Evelyn covered her mouth. Margaret looked almost emotional with joy. "Read it." "Absolutely not," Adrian said. Daniel opened the notebook. Violation 1. Adrian lunged for it. Daniel moved around the table. Claire was laughing too hard to help either of them. Violation 18. Daniel Reed purchased Claire's preferred coffee without being asked. Margaret pressed a hand to her chest. How scandalous. Violation 26. Appeared at Hawthorne House under questionable corporate justification after learning Claire worked closely with an attractive structural engineer. Claire pointed. That one was accurate. It was not. Daniel continued. Violation 32. Stared at wife while believing no one noticed. Adrian stopped. That's fabricated. I witnessed it. That's subjective. Violation 40. Adrian finally grabbed the notebook. Daniel let him have it. Everyone laughed. Even Adrian. He stood beside the table holding the ridiculous record of the year he had spent losing control. Then he smiled. Not the rare, restrained smile Claire had first discovered months ago. A real one. Open. Easy. Margaret saw it. Her laughter faded. For a second, her eyes became wet. Claire noticed. So did Adrian. Margaret looked away first. They returned to the penthouse shortly after 11. Claire removed her shoes near the entrance. Adrian loosened his tie. The apartment was quiet. Tomorrow night, the agreement would end. Neither mentioned it. Claire walked toward the bedroom. Then stopped. Adrian. He looked at her. We need to talk. There it was. He knew before she said anything else. Something inside him tightened. Claire sat on the sofa. Adrian remained standing. "You're leaving?" It wasn't a question. Claire looked down. "Yes." Adrian's expression became unreadable. "When?" "Tomorrow." "How long?" "I don't know." "Where?" "My apartment." "You still have it?" "Yes." "Of course you do." Claire looked at him. He walked toward the windows. She knew this version of Adrian. The one who moved away when something hurt. "Please don't turn this into anger." "I'm not angry." "You are." "I said I'm not." "You're reorganizing your cufflinks." Adrian looked down. He was. He stopped immediately. Claire almost smiled. Then the sadness returned. "This isn't because I don't love you." Adrian became still. She had said it before. Privately. Quietly. But tonight the words hurt differently. "Then stay." Claire closed her eyes. 2 words. No contract. No argument. No negotiation. Just the thing Daniel had told him to say. Claire opened her eyes. "I can't." "Why?" "Because I need to know what we are when this is gone." She pointed toward the office. The contract was kept there. Adrian looked at her. "We know what we are. Do we?" "Yes. We met because you needed a wife." "I don't need one anymore." "That isn't what I mean." "I know exactly what you mean." His voice sharpened. "Then stop pretending the last 8 months weren't real because the first 4 began with paperwork." Claire stood. "I'm not." "Then why leave?" "Because you gave up your company." "I gave up control." "For me." "No." Claire stared at him. "For my father, then." "No." "For Richard?" "Claire." "Then for what?" Adrian looked at her. "For myself." Silence. He stepped closer. "I didn't use those documents because I didn't want to become the man who would use them." Claire's eyes filled. "I know." "Then don't turn my decision into a debt you owe me." Her face changed. Adrian had found the exact fear she had been carrying. "I don't want to." "Then stay." Claire's voice broke slightly. "And what happens 6 months from now when you wake up and realize how much you lost?" "I know what I lost." "You don't know what it will feel like later." "Neither do you." "Exactly." Claire wiped one tear away, irritated with herself. "That is why I need to go." Adrian stared at her. She stepped closer. "If I stay tomorrow, there will always be a small part of me wondering whether I'm staying because you sacrificed something for me. You didn't ask me to." "I know. And there may always be a part of you wondering whether you're holding on because you lost the company and don't want to lose me too." Adrian said nothing. Claire touched his hand. "I want there to be a day when neither of us owes the other anything." "There already is." "For you, maybe." Her fingers tightened around his. "Not yet for me." Adrian looked down at their hands. Every instinct he had told him to solve it. Offer time. Offer reassurance. Change the arrangement. Create another plan. He could ask her to stay for 30 days. He could propose again. He could produce reasons. Terms. Promises. Then he remembered Richard's letter. Control was not the same thing as love. Sometimes love meant allowing another person to make a choice he hated. Adrian looked at Claire. "When will you come back?" She smiled through tears. "If I knew, this wouldn't work." He almost laughed. "That is an extremely irritating answer. I learned from you." "No. My answers are precise." "Your answers are exhausting." He touched her face. Claire leaned into his hand. "Tomorrow?" he asked. "Tomorrow." He kissed her. No urgency. No performance. No attempt to change her mind. Just goodbye. For now. The next evening, Daniel arrived at 11:40. Adrian was alone. Daniel looked around. Claire's plants were still there. Most of her books were gone. Her work boots were gone. The restoration samples were gone. The apartment looked larger. Daniel hated it immediately. She left? Yes. Daniel sat beside him. "I'm sorry." Adrian looked at the clock. 11:51. 9 minutes. Daniel noticed the contract on the table. Planning to burn it? No. Frame it? No. Then why is it here? Adrian looked at the signature page. Claire Bennett. Adrian Richard Cole. 12 months earlier, those names had been nothing more than parties to an agreement. Now they meant something entirely different. 11:58. Daniel remained silent. 11:59. Adrian watched the clock. Midnight. Nothing happened. No dramatic sound. No legal transformation anyone could feel. The agreement simply ended. Daniel opened his notebook. Adrian looked at him. "Don't." Daniel tore out the final page. Then another. Then another. Adrian frowned. "What are you doing?" "Closing the file." Daniel tore the pages until the scorecard was separated from the notebook. Then he placed them on the table. 147 violations. Adrian looked at him. Daniel smiled faintly. "Congratulations." "For what?" "You successfully failed at having a contractual marriage." Adrian laughed quietly. Then he looked around. Claire's favorite mug remained beside the sink. One of her sweaters hung over a chair. And 14 plants still occupied his windows. Adrian frowned. "She left the plants." Daniel looked at them. "Maybe she expects you to keep them alive." "I don't know their watering schedules." Daniel smiled. "You'll figure it out." Adrian looked at Walter. Then Eleanor. Then Frank. 3 months earlier, he would have called the names ridiculous. Now the apartment felt strangely dependent on them. He picked up Claire's mug. For the first time in his life, Adrian had no plan for what happened next. No deadline. No negotiation. No guarantee Claire would return. The uncertainty terrified him. But he didn't call her. He didn't follow her. He didn't create another contract. Instead, Adrian Cole did the one thing Richard had spent a year trying to teach him. He allowed someone he loved to be free. And waited to discover whether, without any obligation at all, they would choose each other again. Part 10, Without a Contract. 3 months after Claire Bennett left the penthouse, Adrian Cole killed Walter. Not intentionally. That distinction mattered to Adrian. Daniel Mercer disagreed. "He's dead." "He is not dead." Daniel stood beside the living room window, staring at the drooping plant. "Adrian, I have attended funerals with more signs of life. The leaves are temporarily distressed. They're brown. Some of them. Most of them." Adrian folded his arms. Daniel touched one leaf. It fell off. Neither man spoke. Daniel looked at the leaf in his hand. Then at Adrian. Adrian's expression hardened. "Don't." Daniel slowly reached into his jacket. "No." The notebook appeared. "You closed that file. This is a new file." "There will be no new file." Daniel opened it. At the top of the first page, he had written, "Post-contract personal development." Adrian stared. "You are 39 years old. Correct. You're a partner at one of the most respected law firms in New York. Also correct. And this is how you use your time. Daniel wrote. 1. Possible negligent homicide of Walter. He's a plant. Daniel added. 2. Lack of remorse. Adrian took the notebook from him. Daniel smiled. Some things had changed. Some had not. The penthouse was one of them. Or perhaps it was the clearest example of both. Claire's restoration samples were gone. Most of her clothes were gone. Her books no longer covered the dining table. But the apartment had never returned to what it had been before her. Adrian had not moved the bronze sculpture back to its original position. He kept the ceramic bowl Claire had placed on the kitchen counter. He listened to music during breakfast now. Not every morning. He had standards. But often enough that Daniel had noticed. The 14 plants had become 13 if Walter's condition was judged pessimistically. Adrian refused to accept that count. And there were photographs. That was perhaps the strangest change. Adrian had once kept almost no personal photographs in the penthouse. Now one sat beside his books. Richard and Thomas outside Hawthorne House. Another showed Margaret, Evelyn, Claire, Daniel, and Adrian at dinner. Adrian had considered removing that one after Claire left. He never did. Daniel looked around. Have you spoken to her? No. 3 months. I understand calendars. You haven't called? No. Texted? No. Sent flowers? She hates roses. Daniel paused. That was unexpectedly good. I remember things. Yes. Unfortunately, you're using your improved emotional intelligence to avoid the woman you love. Adrian's expression changed. She asked for space. She asked for freedom from the contract. Which includes space. Does it include permanent disappearance? No. Then maybe the waiting period has expired. There was no waiting period. Daniel smiled. Exactly. Adrian hated when Daniel made a point using Adrian's own logic. Life after Cole Meridian's top office had turned out to be less catastrophic than Adrian expected. His new office was 12 floors above the ground instead of 46. Daniel had visited on the first day and stood by the window. I can see people. Adrian hadn't looked up. You could see people before. No. Before, they looked theoretical. Adrian had thrown a pen at him. The Northeast Development and Preservation Division was smaller. Its budgets were tighter. Its projects were more complicated. Adrian had fewer assistants. Fewer drivers. Fewer people terrified of telling him no. Unexpectedly, he liked it. He visited properties himself. He knew project managers by name. He attended preservation meetings he previously would have delegated. Once, he spent 45 minutes discussing brick mortar. He remained awake the entire time. Daniel called that love-induced professional development. Adrian called it work. Hawthorne House was nearly complete. That mattered most. The non-profit preservation structure protected the property from redevelopment, regardless of future changes inside Cole Meridian. Claire had overseen the final restoration phase. Adrian knew that through reports. He never requested special updates. At least, not officially. Daniel knew better. You read the Hawthorne report 11 minutes after it arrives every Friday. It is part of my division. You only spend 4 minutes on financial performance. The financial reports are efficiently structured. And Claire's restoration notes? Unnecessarily long. You read every word. Adrian didn't answer. Daniel smiled. Claire had spent the 3 months doing exactly what she promised herself she would do. Living without Adrian Cole. At first, it felt unnatural. Her apartment seemed too small. Too quiet. Then she realized the problem wasn't the apartment. She missed arguing with him. She missed watching him inspect the refrigerator labels as though conducting regulatory compliance. She missed finding her coffee already made. She missed his dry corrections. His impossible seriousness. The tiny smile that appeared whenever she successfully irritated him. Most of all, Claire missed the version of Adrian almost nobody else saw. The man who had sat beside her father's photograph in silence. The man who had chosen not to expose her family. The man who had finally understood that losing control did not mean losing himself. But Claire had needed the separation. The first month hurt. The second clarified things. By the third, something became undeniable. She no longer felt obligated to Adrian. Not because he had helped protect Hawthorne. Not because Richard had helped Thomas. Not because Adrian had sacrificed control of the company. Those debts belonged to the past. What remained was painfully simple. Claire loved him. Not CEO Adrian Cole. Not Richard Cole's son. Not the man who once offered her a fortune for 12 months. Just Adrian. That was exactly why she did not call him. If they began again, Claire wanted him to choose it too. Without a deadline forcing his hand. On a cool Saturday morning in October, Hawthorne House reopened. The restoration had taken years. Local preservation groups attended. Former workers came with their families. Reporters gathered outside. Margaret arrived with Evelyn. Daniel arrived 15 minutes late carrying coffee. And Adrian arrived alone. Margaret looked at him. "Where's your tie?" Adrian looked down. He wore dark trousers, a white shirt, and a navy jacket. "No tie." "I can see that." "Then why did you ask?" Margaret smiled. "Claire hated your ties." Adrian looked toward Hawthorne. "Did she?" "You know she did." Daniel appeared beside him. "She called them emotionally restrictive." Adrian turned. "When?" "Month 7. "Why was she discussing my ties with you?" Daniel drank his coffee. "Claire and I had an independent friendship." "No, you didn't." "We still do." Adrian's eyes narrowed. Daniel smiled. Then Margaret suddenly became interested in something across the courtyard. Adrian noticed. "What?" "Nothing." He followed her gaze. Claire stood near the west entrance. For 3 months, Adrian had seen her only in photographs attached to project reports. None prepared him for the physical fact of her being there. Her hair was loose. She wore dark trousers, ankle boots, and a cream coat. A group of preservation volunteers stood around her. Claire laughed at something one of them said. Adrian stopped moving. Daniel looked at him. Then opened his notebook. Adrian didn't even turn. "Put it away. I haven't written anything." "Your hand moved." Daniel sighed and returned it to his jacket. Across the courtyard, Claire looked up. She saw Adrian. Her smile disappeared. Not because she was unhappy. Because suddenly nothing around her seemed important. For several seconds, neither moved. Margaret looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at Daniel. Daniel whispered, "Nobody interfere." Margaret gave him an offended look. "I would never." Daniel stared at her. Margaret sighed. "Fine." Claire excused herself from the group. Adrian walked toward her. They met near the front steps. The same steps where Richard Cole and Thomas Bennett had once stood arguing about windows. "Hi," Claire said. Adrian looked at her. "Hi." She smiled. "You've become conversational." "I've been practicing." "That must have been exhausting." It was. There it was. That familiar rhythm. Claire's smile widened. Adrian looked toward the building. "It looks good." "Good?" She turned toward Hawthorne. 3 years of restoration and the official evaluation from Adrian Cole is good? Very good. Generous. The west facade is excellent. Better. And the original windows were the correct decision. Claire stared. "Would you repeat that?" "No. I want witnesses." "You already have 4. Claire looked behind him. Margaret, Evelyn, and Daniel immediately looked in different directions. Claire laughed. "Subtle." "They've never been subtle." "No." Silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Just full. Claire looked at him again. "You look different." "I changed jackets." "That's not what I mean." "I know." How is the new job? Good. Only good? Very good. Claire smiled. And the penthouse? Adrian hesitated. Walter is experiencing difficulties. Claire's face changed. What did you do? Nothing. That is probably the problem. I watered him. How often? Adrian answered. Claire's mouth fell open. You drowned Walter. He required water. Not every day. No one gave me written instructions. Claire stared at him. Adrian realized what he had said. For a moment, neither reacted. Then Claire started laughing. Adrian smiled. I walked into that. Completely. I can replace him. You cannot replace Walter. He is a plant. He has emotional significance. According to Daniel, he may still recover. Daniel isn't a botanist. He has strong opinions regardless. Claire shook her head. Then their laughter faded. Adrian looked at her. 3 months. Claire nodded. 3 months. I wanted to call. Why didn't you? You asked for this. I asked for the contract to end. I know. And? Adrian looked toward Hawthorne. Then back at her. And I needed to know whether I could let you leave without trying to control what happened next. Claire's expression softened. Could you? No. She laughed quietly. Adrian continued. But I did. Yes. I hated it. I know. How? Your mother. Adrian closed his eyes. Of course. She didn't interfere. I don't believe that. She only provided periodic observations. That is interference. Claire smiled. Adrian looked at her for another moment. Then he reached into his jacket. Claire's expression changed immediately. Adrian. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. Claire stared. You brought paperwork? Technically. Her eyes narrowed. If that is another contract, this reunion is ending very quickly. It isn't. He handed it to her. Claire unfolded the paper. There were only 4 words. Dinner with me tonight? She looked up. You wrote this down? I want it to be clear. Adrian. There are no terms. Claire looked again. Nothing else. No restaurant. No time. No conditions. No signature lines. She started laughing. Why didn't you just ask? I am asking. You handed me a document. It is a note. A dangerously contract-shaped note. Adrian took it back. Fine. He folded it and put it in his pocket. Then he looked directly at her. Claire Bennett, would you have dinner with me tonight? She studied him. As what? Adrian understood the question. Not wife. Not business partner. Not beneficiary of an old family obligation. Not part of Richard's plan. As a woman I'm asking on a date. Claire's smile appeared slowly. And you? Just Adrian. No CEO? Technically, I'm still a CEO. Claire gave him a look. Fine. No CEO. No lawyers? Absolutely no lawyers. From 20 feet away, Daniel shouted, unnecessarily hostile. Claire laughed. Adrian ignored him. No contract? No contract. No 12-month deadline? No deadline. No separate refrigerator? We never had separate refrigerators. You wanted them. I've evolved. Claire stepped closer. What about morning music? Negotiable. Her eyebrows rose. Careful. That sounded contractual. Adrian smiled. Play whatever you want. Dishwasher? I know how to load it now. Debatable. Claire. She laughed. Then her expression softened. Yes. Adrian became still. Yes? I'll have dinner with you. He smiled. That smile again. Only now Claire understood she didn't have to collect rare glimpses of it. He had changed. Not into another person. Into more of himself. Claire reached for his hand. Adrian looked down. No witnesses required, she said. I know. He closed his fingers around hers. 6 months later, Walter survived. Barely. Claire claimed this proved resilience. Adrian claimed it proved his watering schedule had not been entirely unreasonable. They never settled the argument. Claire did not immediately move back into the penthouse. That surprised Margaret, delighted Daniel, and frustrated Adrian. They dated properly for the first time. Adrian picked Claire up for dinner. Claire occasionally made him wait because she wasn't ready. Adrian discovered that saying, "The reservation is at 7, did not make a woman finish getting dressed faster. Claire discovered Adrian could sit through an entire movie. Adrian discovered popcorn qualified as dinner under certain circumstances. They argued. They apologized. They learned. Not because a contract required compatibility. Because they wanted a life together. Eventually, Claire returned to the penthouse. This time, she brought 16 boxes. Adrian stared at them. "You had 11 last time. I've grown. You acquired 5 boxes in 18 months? Mostly books. Where are they going?" "Our home." The word stopped him. Claire noticed. Adrian looked around. The plants. The books. The ceramic bowl. The photographs. Her work boots beside his shoes. His father's picture near Thomas Bennett's. He smiled. "Our home." Claire kissed him. Daniel, unfortunately, happened to be entering at that exact moment. He immediately reached for his notebook. Adrian pointed at the door. "Out. I have legal documents. Leave them. They require signatures." Claire pulled away. "No contracts." Daniel stared. "These are non-profit incorporation documents for Hawthorne." Claire considered it. "Fine." Daniel looked at Adrian. "She runs the house now." Adrian nodded. "I know. You're disturbingly comfortable with that." "I've evolved." Claire smiled. Richard Cole had believed his son needed marriage to learn that life could not be controlled. He had been partly wrong. Marriage itself had taught Adrian very little. A contract certainly hadn't taught him how to love. Claire had. She taught him through inconvenient music and mislabeled groceries, through plaster dust and arguments, through laughter, honesty, distance, and finally the freedom to leave. And Adrian taught Claire something too. That accepting love did not create a debt. That sacrifice freely chosen did not require repayment. That two people could stand beside each other without either becoming responsible for saving the other. Their first marriage had begun with 27 pages of rules. Their real relationship began with none. Years later, the original contract remained locked inside Daniel's office archive. On the front, he had added one handwritten note. "Closed, spectacularly unsuccessful." And beneath it, "Best possible outcome." Sometimes the relationship that changes a life does not begin at the right time or for the right reason. Sometimes people meet while carrying old obligations, old fears, and ideas about who they are supposed to be. What matters is what remains when those obligations disappear. For Adrian and Claire, what remained was choice. And in the end, choosing each other freely meant more than any promise they could ever have written into a contract. What would you have done in Claire's position? Would you have walked away when the 12 months ended, or stayed and trusted that their love had already become real?